My brother called me at 8 in the morning on a Sunday. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He just said, "Mom died last night. The funeral is Monday. She left everything to me. You get nothing." I held the phone away from my ear, looking at the display. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just smiled because Mom was sitting right across from me at the kitchen table, blowing on a spoonful of hot oatmeal. Before I continue this story of betrayal and the sweetest revenge you will ever hear, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Otis King. I am 75 years old, and to the outside world, I look like just another retired old man living out his final years in a clapboard house on the edge of Atlanta. People see my faded truck and my worn-out work boots, and they think I am simple. They think I have nothing. They do not know that for 30 years I was the president of the transport union. They do not know about the properties I own across the state or the investments I made when the city was still young. I learned a long time ago that silence is power and wealth is best kept quiet, especially when you have family like mine. The morning sun was cutting through the blinds of my kitchen, painting stripes of light across the wooden table. The air smelled of fresh coffee and the bacon I had just fried. It was a peaceful morning, the kind of Sunday morning a man works his whole life to enjoy. My mother. Hattie sat across from me. She is 95 years old, but her back is straight as a plank, and her eyes are sharp enough to thread a needle without glasses. She was dressed in her Sunday robe, eating her breakfast with the slow, deliberate movements of a woman who has outlived all her enemies. The peace was shattered by the ringtone of my landline. It was a harsh, mechanical sound that seemed to slice through the calm. I looked at the caller ID. It displayed a name I had not seen in 5 years, Darius. Darius is my younger brother, 68 years old, and a man who has spent his entire life running from honest work. He has always been the loud one, the flashy one, the one who wears suits he cannot afford and drives cars he has not paid for. He calls himself an entrepreneur, but everyone in Atlanta knows he is just a hustler with a mounting pile of debt. I picked up the phone expecting a request for money or a sob story about his latest failed business venture, but I did not expect the ice in his voice. "Otis," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any real emotion. "Mom is gone. She passed away last night at Silver Oaks." I froze. Not because of the news, but because of the audacity of the lie. I looked at Hattie. She had stopped eating her spoon, hovering halfway to her mouth. She had heard his voice through the receiver. She did not move. She just stared at the phone, her grip tightening on the handle of her oak cane. I did not say a word. I pressed the speakerphone button so she could hear every single word of the betrayal that was about to unfold. "What happened?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, masking the storm that was brewing inside me. Darius let out a sigh, a rehearsed sound of grief that made my stomach turn. It was a stroke. Otis. Massive. The doctors at Silver Oaks said she did not suffer. She went peacefully in her sleep around midnight. I was there. Otis. I held her hand as she took her last breath. I watched my mother as she listened to her son lie about her death. She did not blink, she did not gasp, she just narrowed her eyes. Those dark eyes that had seen nearly a century of history, including the depression and segregation and the rise and fall of better men than Darius. She chewed her oatmeal slowly, swallowing the betrayal along with her breakfast. Silver Oaks. The nursing home he mentioned was a place of nightmares. 3 years ago, Darius and his wife Amber had put her there. They had signed the papers while I was out of town, claiming they could not care for her anymore. They stopped paying the bills after 2 months, thinking she would just wither away and die. They did not know I had gone there the moment I returned, paid the back fees, and brought her home to live with me. They never visited, they never called. They just assumed she was rotting away in that facility, waiting for the end. "And the funeral?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight. "The funeral is tomorrow, Monday," Darius said, his voice speeding up a little. He was anxious. He wanted this over with tomorrow. "Why so soon, Otis? You know how Mom was. She always said she did not want a fuss. She wanted to be cremated immediately. She made me promise no open casket. Just ashes and a quick service, so we had her cremated this morning right after the coroner signed off." Cremated. My mother is a woman of the old school, a woman of the church she has bought and paid for a plot next to our father. Since 1985, she has a dress picked out for her burial, a lavender silk gown that hangs in the back of her closet covered in plastic. She would never choose cremation, and Darius knew it, but a cremation meant no body, and no body meant no evidence. It meant he could bury an empty urn and collect the death certificate without anyone asking questions. It was smart in a criminal sort of way, but it was also the sloppiest mistake of his life. I understand, I said, keeping my voice low, playing the part of the grieving, confused older brother in the estate. Darius cleared his throat, the sound of greed taking over the performance. Well, that is the other thing, Otis. Mom left a will, a new one. She signed it last month at the home. She left the house to me, the family house and the life insurance policy. She said you never visited her, Otis. She said you abandoned her, so you get nothing. The house is mine, the money is mine, it is what she wanted. The family house, the house we grew up in. The house our father built with his own hands, brick by brick. It wasn't a mansion, but it sat on a double lot in a neighborhood that was gentrifying fast. Developers had been circling that block like sharks for years, offering cash for the land. Darius didn't want the home, he wanted the dirt. He wanted to bulldoze our history to pay off his gambling debts and the insurance policy. $500,000 a policy my father had taken out decades ago. A policy Darius had been eyeing like a starving dog eyes a steak. I looked at Mom. She was shaking now, not from fear, not from sadness, but from a rage so pure it radiated off her like heat. She set her spoon down with a clatter. She reached out with a hand that had scrubbed floors and disciplined children and pointed a trembling finger at the phone. She wanted to speak. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear him apart through the wire. But I shook my head. I put a finger to my lips, signaling her to stay silent. Not yet, Mom. Not yet. Let him dig the hole. Let him jump in. Let him pull the dirt over his own head. So I am not invited to the funeral, I asked. I am banning you. Otis, Darius said, his voice hardening, dropping the act of the grieving son, finding the arrogance of the bully Amber, and, I think it is best you stay away. Your presence would only upset people. Everyone knows. You didn't care about her. Everyone knows you left her to rot in that home. If you show up, I will have security remove you. Do not make a scene. Otis, just stay in your shack and let us mourn in peace. Amber, his wife, a woman 20 years his junior, with eyes that calculated the cost of everything she looked at. I could hear her in the background whispering, prompting him. Tell him about the lawyer. Tell him it is legally binding. Darius paused, listening to his puppet master. Yes? And do not try to contest the will. My lawyer has everything locked down. Mom was of sound mind when she signed it. She knew exactly what she was doing, giving everything to the son who actually loved her. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, a dark, cold laugh sound. Mine, she was certainly of sound mind right now, sitting here in her robe, listening to her son declare her dead and cremated, hearing him claim an inheritance that did not exist, hearing him ban her other son from a funeral. That was a sham. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Monday tomorrow. Less than 24 hours he was rushing this through. He needed that money fast. He must be in deep trouble, deeper than I thought. You don't stage a fake funeral for a living mother unless you have wolves at your door. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still hot, bitter and strong, just the way I like it. I looked at Hattie. Her face had settled into a mask of stone, the kind of expression she used to wear when she had to make a switch from a tree branch to discipline us when we were boys. She was ready. She was a warrior, and she had just been handed a sword. Okay, Darius, I said, letting my voice crack just a little, feigning the defeat he wanted to hear. If that is what Mom wanted, if that is what you think is best, I won't come. I won't cause trouble. You go ahead. You have your funeral. You mourn her. Enjoy the house. Darius, enjoy the money. I hope it brings you everything you deserve. Good, Darius said, and I could hear the relief washing over him. The triumphant exhale of a man who thinks he has just pulled off the heist of the century. Goodbye, Otis, don't call us. We will handle everything. The line went dead. I put the receiver down gently into the cradle. The silence in the kitchen returned, but it was different now. It was charged with electricity. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. I looked at my mother. She looked at me. She picked up her napkin and wiped her mouth with dignity. She smoothed the front of her robe. She picked up her spoon and took another bite of oatmeal. She swallowed, and then she spoke. Her voice was not weak. It was not old. It was the voice of the matriarch, the voice of authority. He said I was cremated. She asked, her eyes flashing. Yes, Mama, I said. He said I left him the house. Yes, Mama. He said I didn't love you. I nodded. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling beneath the flannel robe. She looked out the window at the garden she had planted 50 years ago, at the hydrangeas that were just starting to bloom. She looked at the photos on the fridge, pictures of Darius when he was a baby, pictures of me, pictures of a family that had once been whole. "Otis," she said, and her voice was as cold as the grave he claimed she was in. "Get me my phone book. Call that lawyer of yours, Jamal, and call Dr. Evans. Tell them to come here right now, and Otis, get my Sunday hat out of the box, the big one with the veil." I smiled a slow, dangerous smile. "Why, Mama?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "Because," she said, slamming her cane against the floor, "if my son wants a funeral, I am going to give him a funeral, but he is the one who is going to get buried, not me." I stood up and cleared the table. The game was on. Darius had started a fire, thinking he could burn us out. He didn't realize he was standing in a room full of gasoline and I was holding the match. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow was the funeral, and tomorrow my brother was going to learn that you never ever bury a king until you are sure they are dead. The silence in the kitchen after I hung up the phone was heavy, but it was not the silence of grief. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength. I looked at my mother, Hattie, still sitting at the table, her spine as straight as a steel rod. Her eyes fixed on the garden outside. She was 95 years old, but in that moment she looked like she had traveled back in time to the days when she had to fight for every scrap of dignity she possessed. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was paper thin and cool, but her grip was strong. She squeezed my hand once, a silent signal that she was all right, that she was ready for war. I cleared the breakfast dishes, my movements automatic while my mind traveled back 3 years to the place where this nightmare truly began, to a place called Silver Oaks. 3 years ago, I had to leave Atlanta for 2 months to handle a delicate negotiation for the union in Chicago. It was a mess of strikes and backroom deals that required my full attention. I had left Mom in her own home, comfortable and safe, with a visiting nurse I paid for in cash. Darius knew I was gone. He knew the house was vulnerable. He and Amber saw an opening, a crack in the fortress I had built around her. When I returned, the house was empty. The locks were changed, and the neighbors told me Darius had come with a moving truck and a lawyer claiming Mom had deteriorated, claiming she needed professional care, claiming he was the only son who stepped up. I found her at Silver Oaks, a converted motel on the south side that smelled of bleach and urine and despair. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where families dropped off their guilt and drove away, never to return. I walked past the reception desk where a bored girl was popping gum and scrolling on her phone. I walked down the hallway where the linoleum was peeling and the fluorescent lights flickered like dying stars. I found Mom in room 104. A closet of a room with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. She was sitting in a wheelchair that wasn't hers, wearing a hospital gown that was 2 sizes too big. She looked small. She looked frail. She looked like she was waiting to die. But when she saw me, her eyes snapped open and the fire was still there. She didn't cry. She just said, "Took you long enough?" "Otis?" I went to the administration office, ready to tear the building down brick by brick. The director, a sweaty man with a stain on his tie, looked up at me with disdain. He told me Darius and Amber had signed her in, claiming she was indigent, claiming she had no assets. He told me they had paid the first month in cash and then vanished for 2 months. The bills had piled up. The facility was preparing to transfer her to a state ward, to a shelter for the homeless, because the checks had bounced and the phone numbers were disconnected. Darius had dumped her there like old furniture and stopped paying the storage fee, thinking nature would take its course, thinking the neglect would kill her before the money ran out. I did not scream at the man. I did not threaten him. I pulled out a roll of $100 bills from my pocket, a roll thick enough to choke a horse. I paid the back balance. I paid the transfer fees, and I tipped the orderlies to pack her things carefully. I took her out of there that same afternoon. I brought her to my house, the one Darius calls a shack, the one that sits on 10 acres of prime land. I own through a shell company. I set her up in the master bedroom with the garden view. I hired private nurses who signed non-disclosure agreements. I bought her the best food, the softest linens, the medication she needed. I nurtured her back to health. I watched the color return to her cheeks and the strength return to her legs, but I never told Darius. I let him believe she was gone. I let him believe his plan had worked, because I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to see if he would ever come looking for her. He never did. Back in the present, the vibration of my cell phone against the wooden table snapped me out of the memory. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from a number I had saved under the name The Snake. It was Amber, my sister-in-law, The woman who whispered poison into my brother's ear and spent money she did not have on things she did not need. I opened the message and the words were like acid burning across the screen. It read, "Do not even think about fighting us regarding the will or the house. We have documents, Otis. We have sworn statements from the staff at Silver Oaks, proving you abandoned her for years. We have proof you never visited my lawyer will crush you if you show your face at the funeral or try to claim a single dime stay in your lane, loser." I stared at the message and a low chuckle escaped my throat. She was accusing me of the very crime they had committed. She was projecting her own sins onto me, creating a narrative where I was the villain, and they were the saints who had cared for a dying woman. It was bold, it was audacious, and it was incredibly stupid. She was threatening a man she thought was a broke, retired mechanic. She had no idea she was poking a sleeping bear. She had no idea that I had the receipts from Silver Oaks. She had no idea I had the discharge papers signed by me. She had no idea I had video footage of me carrying Mom out of that hellhole while the staff waved goodbye. I did not reply to the text. I did not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I picked up my encrypted burner phone, the one I kept for business that had nothing to do with fixing cars. I dialed a number I had not used in a year. Sly, a private investigator who used to work Vice for the Atlanta PD before he realized the real money was in corporate espionage and digging up dirt for people who could pay. Sly owed me a favor from back in the day when I helped his nephew get out of a tight spot with the union. Sly answered on the second ring, his voice raspy from years of chain smoking. "Otis," he said, "I saw the obituary for Ms. Hattie. I am sorry for your loss. I cut him off. There is no loss. Sly, Mom is sitting right here eating toast, but Darius thinks she is dead. He is faking a funeral tomorrow to cash in on a policy. I need to know why. I need to know why now and why so fast. I need to know who he owes and how much. Dig deep, Sly. Look at the gambling debts. Look at the credit cards. Look at Amber. Find the bleeding wound." Sly whistled low into the phone. "Damn, Otis, that is cold even for Darius. Give me an hour." I hung up and poured Mom another cup of coffee. She was watching me, her eyes sharp. She knew I was working. She knew the tone of my voice. She had heard it before when I was dealing with strikebreakers and corrupt city officials. She knew I was setting a trap. She sipped her coffee and adjusted the collar of her robe, saying nothing, trusting me to handle the business, trusting me to protect the family name, even if it meant destroying the family members. 45 minutes later, the burner phone rang. Sly did not waste time. He went straight to the numbers. "Otis, it is bad. It is worse than bad. Darius is in a hole so deep he can see the devil. He owes $200,000 to a loan shark named Vinny the Roach, a man who breaks fingers for late fees and kneecaps for missed payments. The debt is due Tuesday. Otis, if Darius does not pay by Tuesday noon, Vinny is going to start taking pieces of him, literally. That explains the rush. That explains the cremation. No body means no autopsy. No autopsy means quick payout on the insurance. He needs that $500,000 policy to stay alive." "And Amber?" I asked, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside the window. "What is her angle?" Sly laughed a dry, cynical sound. "Amber has maxed out 5 credit cards in the last month. Otis, she is $50,000 in the hole to Visa and MasterCard. But here is the kicker. She has a consultation scheduled for Wednesday with a plastic surgeon in Miami. A full mommy makeover tummy tuck, lift the works, cost is $30,000 required. Up front. She is banking on that insurance money to pay for her vanity while your brother pays for his life. They are spending the death benefit before the ink is dry on the death certificate." I thanked Sly and told him to send the file to my secure email. I sat there processing the information. The picture was complete now. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Darius was a drowning man trying to use his mother's corpse as a raft. Amber was a narcissist willing to sell her soul for a tighter waistline. They needed this funeral to happen. They needed the death certificate to be official. They needed the insurance company to cut the check by Tuesday morning. If I stopped them now, if I called the police or the insurance company today, they would claim it was a mistake. A misunderstanding. They would say they got bad information from the nursing home. They would wiggle out of it. Darius would claim he was a victim of grief and confusion. But if I let them go through with it, if I let them stand in front of God and the congregation and lie, if I let them file the fraudulent claim with the insurance company, if I let them accept the sympathy and the casserole dishes while knowing their mother was alive, then it became a felony. Then it became fraud, wire fraud, insurance fraud, forgery. It became a crime that carried a 10-year mandatory sentence in a federal penitentiary. I looked at Mom. She had finished her toast. She was wiping the crumbs from the table, her hand steady, her face serene. She looked up at me and raised an eyebrow, waiting for the verdict. "They owe the wrong people, Mom," I said quietly. "Darius owes 200 grand to the Sharks, due Tuesday. Amber needs 30 grand for surgery. They are rushing the funeral to get the insurance payout they think they have won. They think you are ash in a jar, and I am a ghost in the wind." Mom nodded slowly, taking it in. She didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. Deeply, profoundly disappointed in the son she had birthed, but she didn't look hesitant. She tapped her fingers on the table, a slow, rhythmic beat. "Let them do it," she said, her voice hard as granite. "Let them stand up there and lie. Let them dig the grave deep. Otis, I want to see their faces when the dirt hits the coffin. I want to see them fall." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the long driveway that led to the road. Darius and Amber thought they were the predators. They thought they were the wolves, culling the weak from the herd. They didn't know they had walked into a lion's den. They didn't know that the prey they were hunting was watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I pulled out my phone and texted Amber back a single line. "See you at the funeral." I turned back to Mom. "Get dressed," I said. "We have a show to prepare for. We need to make sure you look your best for your resurrection." I picked up the phone again and dialed my lawyer, Jamal. I told him to meet us at the church tomorrow with a notary and a team of private security. I told him to bring the file on the shell company that owned the house and the medical records from the last 3 years proving Mom was alive and well. I told him to prepare the papers for a restraining order and a civil suit that would strip Darius of every asset he had left, assuming the loan sharks didn't get to him first. The game was set. The players were in motion. Darius and Amber were walking blindly toward a cliff, thinking it was a gold mine. They were about to learn that you cannot bury the truth, especially when the truth is a 95-year-old woman who has survived Jim Crow poverty and the loss of a husband. She was not going to let her son turn her into a paycheck. She was going to turn him into a lesson he would study behind bars for a very long time. I went to my closet and pulled out my black suit, the one I wore to meetings with senators and CEOs, the one that cost more than Darius's car. I brushed off the lint and hung it on the door tomorrow. I wouldn't be Otis the mechanic tomorrow. I would be Otis King, the man who settles scores. I walked into my study, which is the one room in the house Darius never bothered to look in when he was growing up because he thought it was just full of boring tax papers and old union manuals. He was wrong. It was the nerve center of an empire he didn't know existed. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. It wasn't the latest model, but it had software on it that you cannot buy at Best Buy. I still had friends in the city administration, friends who owed their careers to the union votes I delivered 30 years ago. Friends who gave me backdoor access to the vital records database. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to see the paper trail of my mother's murder. It took me 5 minutes to find it. The digital file was fresh, uploaded into the system at 4 a.m. that morning. Certificate of death. Hattie Mae King. Cause of death. Acute viral pneumonia, leading to respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. Contributory factors. Advanced age. I stared at the words and felt a cold fire burning in my gut. Pneumonia. Infectious. Dangerous. Requiring immediate containment. That was the narrative. That was the lie that justified the closed casket and the rush to the crematorium. But my eyes drifted down to the bottom of the screen, to the attending physician's signature block. I needed to know who had sold his soul to help my brother bury a living woman. Dr. Marcus Vance. The name hit me like a slap in the face. I knew Vance. He was a bottom feeder, a man who had lost his hospital privileges 10 years ago for overprescribing opioids. He ran a strip mall clinic over on Stewart Avenue, a place where cash was king and questions were never asked. Vance was a man who walked the line between negligence and criminal intent, and apparently he had finally crossed it. He had signed a death certificate for a woman he hadn't seen in years, a woman who was currently sitting in my kitchen humming a gospel tune while she polished her silver. I picked up the phone and called Jamal, my lawyer. Jamal is the best criminal defense attorney in Atlanta, a man who wears $3,000 suits and has a smile like a shark. He answered on the first ring. "Otis," he said, "I have the papers ready for the civil suit." I cut him off. "Forget the civil suit. Jamal, meet me at Dr. Vance's clinic in 20 minutes. Bring the file on Vance, the one we compiled last year when he tried to sue the union for defamation. Bring the photos, bring the inventory logs, bring everything. We are going to pay the good doctor a house call." I drove my beat-up truck to the clinic, keeping to the speed limit, letting the rage simmer down into a cold, hard focus. The clinic was sandwiched between a liquor store and a bail bondsman office. The windows were tinted dark, and the sign above the door was missing. A letter inside the waiting room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. People were sitting in plastic chairs, looking at the floor, waiting for their scripts, waiting for a fix. Jamal was waiting for me by the door, looking out of place in his Italian wool suit against the peeling paint of the clinic wall. We didn't speak. I just nodded, and we walked past the receptionist who tried to stop us. "Hey, you can't go back there," she yelled, but Jamal flashed a badge that looked official enough to make her hesitate, and by the time she stood up we were already pushing through the door marked private. Dr. Vance was sitting behind a cluttered desk eating a sandwich. His white coat was stained, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked up, startled, a piece of lettuce falling from his lip. "Who the hell are you?" "Get out of my office," he stammered, reaching for the phone. I moved faster than a 75-year-old man should. I reached across the desk and put my hand on the receiver, pushing it down, disconnecting the line. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, letting him see the scars on my knuckles, letting him see the eyes of a man who had stared down strikebreakers with baseball bats. "Otis King," I said, my voice low and rough. "You remember me, Vance. We met at the hearing when you lost your license to practice surgery." Vance swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "King, what do you want? I am busy saving lives here." Jamal stepped forward, placing a leather briefcase on the desk with a heavy thud. "Saving lives, or ending them, doctor?" Jamal asked, smooth as silk. He opened the briefcase and slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of the death certificate for Hattie King. Vance looked at the paper, and all the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like wet dough. "I don't know what this is." He lied, his voice cracking. "That is a valid medical document signed by a licensed professional." "You signed a death certificate for a woman who is alive and well." "Vance," I said, leaning in close enough to smell the onions on his breath. "You declared my mother dead of pneumonia at midnight last night. You claimed you attended to her. You claimed you verified the cessation of life. Did she look peaceful? Vance, did she have any last words? Or did you just sign the paper while Darius counted out cash on this very desk?" Vance tried to stand up to muster some indignation. "Get out or I will call the police. Call them," Jamal said, pulling a stack of photos from the briefcase and fanning them out on the desk like a winning poker hand. "Please call them, and while we wait for them to arrive, let's discuss these photos. This is you, Vance, leaving the Motel 6 on Cheshire Bridge Road last Tuesday, and this is the young lady with you. She looks very young." "Vance, maybe too young, and she definitely isn't your wife." Vance slumped back into his chair, his eyes darting from the photos to Jamal to me. Sweat broke out on his forehead, beading up along his receding hairline. "What do you want?" he whispered. Jamal wasn't done. He pulled out another document, a spreadsheet with highlighted rows, and "Let's talk about your inventory logs. Doctor, we have a source in your pharmacy supplier who says you are ordering 3 times the amount of oxycodone that your patient load justifies, and yet your records show everything is dispensed legally. Funny thing, though, we tracked some of those prescriptions. They went to dead people. Vance, you are running a ghost pill mill." Vance put his head in his hands. He was shaking now, a trembling mess of a man who realized his house of cards had just been kicked over by a bulldozer. "Please," he moaned. Darius said. "It was easy. He said the old lady was practically dead anyway. He said she was in a vegetative state. He said nobody would check." "So you admitted," I asked, my voice hard as iron. "You admit you falsified a federal document. You admit you took a bribe." "He paid me $5,000. Vance blurted out the words, tumbling over each other in his haste to confess. $5,000 cash. He brought it in a duffel bag. The wife, Amber. She was the one who insisted on the pneumonia. Cause she said it had to be infectious. She said they needed an excuse to cremate the body immediately without a viewing. She said if anyone saw the body, they would know she wasn't dead yet. No, wait, she meant they would know she wasn't sick. I mean, I didn't know she was alive, Otis. I swear I thought she died at home, and they just wanted to speed up the paperwork to get the insurance money. I didn't know I was killing a living woman on paper. Amber. Of course it was Amber. The infectious disease angle was smart evil, but smart. It stopped family members from asking to see the body. It stopped the funeral home from asking too many questions. It created a biohazard situation that required immediate disposal via fire. She was thorough. I had to give her that. She was thorough, and she was soulless. So you signed it, I said, my voice filled with disgust. You signed my mother's life away for $5,000 and a lie about pneumonia. You authorized the cremation of a woman who is currently knitting a scarf in my living room right now. I can fix it, Vance stammered, reaching for the computer. I can rescind it. I will call the coroner. I will tell them it was a clerical error. I will tell them I made a mistake. Please, Otis, don't give those photos to the police. Don't ruin me. I will testify against Darius. I will tell everyone what they did. Just let me fix the certificate. He reached for the keyboard, his shaking fingers hovering over the keys, ready to erase the crime, ready to undo the damage, ready to stop the funeral before it even began. And for a second, I thought about letting him. I thought about ending this right here, saving Mom the trauma, saving myself the spectacle. It would be the easy thing to do. It would be the merciful thing to do. But mercy was not on the agenda today. Justice was, and justice required a full accounting. It required the crime to be completed. It required the trap to snap shut, not on the paw, but on the neck. If Vance canceled the certificate, now Darius and Amber would claim it was a misunderstanding. They would claim they were confused by grief. They would slip away. They would survive to try again, and next time they might actually succeed in killing her. "Don't touch that keyboard," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. Vance froze, looking up at me with terror-filled eyes. "You aren't going to fix anything." "Vance," I said, walking around the desk until I was standing over him, "you are going to leave that certificate exactly as it is. You are going to let the system process it. You are going to let the funeral home pick up the urn of cat litter or whatever Darius gave them. You are going to let the funeral happen." "But why?" Vance asked, confused. "Why would you want them to think she is dead?" "Because I want to see them bury themselves," I said, leaning down until my face was inches from his. "I want them to stand in that church and lie to God. I want them to file the insurance claim. I want them to commit the fraud all the way to the end. Because when I bring the hammer down, Vance, I want to make sure there is nothing left of them but dust." "And what about me?" Vance whispered. "What happens to me?" I looked at Jamal. He smiled, a cold, predatory smile. "That depends on you," Dr. Jamal said. "You are going to sit here, and you are going to be quiet. You are not going to call Darius. You are not going to call Amber. You are not going to warn them. You are going to attend the funeral tomorrow. You are going to sit in the back row, and you are going to look sad. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, if you even think about tipping them off these photos, go to the medical board. The drug logs go to the DEA, and I personally will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cell with a roommate who doesn't like doctors." Vance nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face, sweating through his dirty lab coat. "I won't say a word. I promise. I will be there. I will do whatever you say, just don't ruin me." "You ruined yourself the day you took that money," I said, straightening up and adjusting my jacket. "Keep your phone off, Vance. We will be watching you." We walked out of the office, leaving him shivering in his chair. We walked past the reception desk and out into the bright Atlanta sunlight. The air felt clean after the stench of that office. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. "You are playing a dangerous game," Otis Jamal said as we walked to my truck, letting the funeral happen, allowing the fraud to proceed. "That is entrapment if we were cops. But we aren't cops, are we?" "No," I said, climbing into the truck and starting the engine. "We are just grieving family members, Jamal, and we are going to give my brother exactly what he wants. We are going to give him a funeral he will never forget." I drove home thinking about the death certificate sitting in the system, a digital lie waiting to become a prison sentence. I thought about Amber and her plastic surgery dreams. I thought about Darius and his gambling debts. They thought they had bought a doctor. They thought they had bought a quick exit. They didn't know. They had just bought tickets to their own destruction. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow the curtain would go up, and I intended to be in the front row. I pulled my old Ford truck up to the curb about 3 houses down from the place where I learned to walk, the place where my father taught me how to fix a carburetor, and where my mother taught me the difference between being a man and being a grown male. The house on Elm Street was not a mansion. It was a 2-story brick colonial with a wraparound porch that my daddy built with his own 2 hands back in 1955. He had paid for every brick with sweat and overtime at the plant. It was the physical manifestation of the King family legacy, and seeing it now made my stomach turn over in a way that had nothing to do with the stale coffee I had been drinking all morning. There were signs staked into the lawn, bright neon pink poster board that screamed, "Estate sale, everything must go. Cash." Only looking at those signs felt like looking at a gravestone that had been vandalized. Darius and Amber were not even waiting for the body to get cold. They were stripping the carcass before the funeral service had even begun. I adjusted my baseball cap, pulling the brim down low over my eyes, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing dirty coveralls and a pair of sunglasses that covered half my face to the casual observer. I was just another old man looking for a bargain on a used lawnmower or a set of tools to my brother and his wife. I was invisible, which was exactly how I needed to be. I looked over at the passenger seat. Mom was sitting there. Hidden behind the dark tint of the window, she was wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses and a scarf over her head, looking like a movie star trying to avoid the paparazzi. But her hands were gripping her cane so hard her knuckles were white. She was watching the scene on her front lawn, her eyes tracking every stranger who picked up her china, every person who haggled over the price of her quilt collection. "Stay here, Mama," I said quietly. "Lock the doors. Do not roll down the window, no matter what you see or hear. I need to get closer. I need to get this on tape." She nodded once. A sharp jerk of her chin. "Go," she whispered. "Bring me back the truth. Otis, bring me back their sins." I stepped out of the truck and walked slowly toward the house, forcing myself to adopt the shuffle of a man whose knees have given up on him. The lawn was crowded with people, strangers digging through boxes of my childhood vultures, picking over the bones of a life well lived. I saw a woman holding up Mom's Sunday hat, the one with the purple ribbon, asking if she would take $5 for it. I saw a man testing the weight of Dad's old toolbox, the one he used to build the porch swing. And there, in the center of the chaos, holding court like a queen on a throne made of stolen goods, was Amber. She was wearing a tight black dress that was inappropriate for a Sunday, and certainly inappropriate for a grieving daughter-in-law. She was holding a glass of white wine in one hand and a stack of cash in the other, laughing at something a neighbor said. She looked triumphant. She looked like she had just won the lottery, and in her mind, she had. I moved closer, blending in with a group of people looking at the kitchenware. I pulled out my phone, holding it casually at my side, the camera lens peeking out from my grip, recording video and audio. I needed her words. I needed her malice. I needed the jury to see not just the fraud, but the hate. Amber took a sip of wine and turned to a woman I recognized as one of her high school friends. A woman named Shelley, who was just as vapid and cruel as she was. "Finally," Amber said, her voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "Finally, the old hag is gone. Shelley, you have no idea what a relief it is to breathe fresh air in this house again. It smelled like old people and cabbage and death for years. I thought she would never die. I thought she was going to outlive us all just to spite me." Shelley laughed, touching Amber's arm sympathetically. "You poor thing. It must have been so hard taking care of her." Amber rolled her eyes hard. "We didn't take care of her. We warehoused her, but even then she was a drain. The money we spent on that nursing home could have bought us a boat, but that is over now. The house is ours. Darius is talking to a developer. But I have a better idea. Airbnb, Shelley. This location is up and coming. We can rent this place out for $300 a night on weekends. We just need to gut it first, get rid of all this old junk paint, everything white, make it modern, get rid of the stench of the King family history." I felt a surge of rage so powerful it almost made me drop the phone. Gut it, paint it white, erase 50 years of history to turn it into a rental for tourists who wouldn't know the blood and sweat that went into those floors. She was talking about my home like it was a teardown. She was talking about my mother like she was a stain on the carpet. But then I saw it, and the rage turned into something colder, something sharper, something deadly. Around her neck, resting against her skin, was the pearl necklace. It wasn't a flashy piece. It was a single strand of Akoya pearls, creamy and lustrous, with a small diamond clasp. My father had bought that necklace for Mom for their 30th anniversary. He had saved for 2 years, putting aside money in a coffee can in the garage. He had presented it to her with tears in his eyes, telling her she was the pearl of great price. It was the most valuable thing Mom owned, not because of the money, but because of the love it represented. Mom wore it to church on Easter and Christmas. She kept it in a velvet box in her top drawer. She had told me once she wanted to be buried in it. And here was Amber wearing it to a yard sale, wearing it while she sold Mom's pots and pans for pennies on the dollar, wearing it while she drank cheap wine and insulted the woman who owned it. It was a desecration. It was a violation so profound it made my hands shake. I zoomed in with the camera, focusing on the pearls, focusing on her face, focusing on the casual cruelty of her smile. Just then, Darius came out of the front door carrying a large cardboard box. He was sweating, his shirt stained at the armpits, his eyes darting around nervously. He looked like a man who was running out of time. He walked past the tables, past the buyers, and headed straight for the large dumpster he had rented and parked in the driveway. He wasn't selling what was in the box. He was throwing it away. I followed him, keeping my distance, pretending to examine a lawnmower. When he reached the dumpster, he lifted the box high over his head and dumped it. The contents spilled out, tumbling into the metal container amidst the trash and construction debris. Frames shattered, glass broke, paper fluttered in the breeze. I moved closer as he walked away, wiping his hands on his pants as if he had just touched something filthy. I looked into the dumpster and my heart stopped. Lying on top of a pile of old insulation and broken drywall were the family photos, pictures of me in my army uniform, pictures of Darius graduating high school, pictures of mom and dad on their wedding day, pictures of family reunions, barbecues, birthdays, 50 years of memories captured on film, 50 years of proof that we were a family, that we loved each other, that we existed. Darius had thrown them away like garbage. He was erasing us. He was deleting the past to make room for his future. I reached in and grabbed a photo that had landed near the top. It was a picture of Mom holding Darius when he was a baby. She was looking at him with such adoration, such hope, such unconditional love. I looked at the man walking back toward the house, counting the cash in his pocket, and I wondered how that baby had turned into this monster. I put the photo in my pocket next to the phone that was still recording. I had what I needed. I had the pearls on video. I had the confession about the Airbnb. I had the desecration of the memories. I walked back toward the crowd, moving closer to Amber. Again, she was negotiating with a man who wanted to buy Mom's sewing machine, the singer she had used to make our clothes when we were kids. The machine she had used to sew costumes for the church play. The machine that had hummed us to sleep on rainy afternoons. $20, Amber said dismissively. Just take it, get it out of here. It takes up too much space. The man handed her a 20 and picked up the machine, lugging it away like it was scrap metal. Amber turned back to Shelley, laughing. $20 for a piece of junk. Can you believe it? This is so easy. We are going to make a killing this weekend, and the insurance check clears Tuesday. Shelley, we are going to be rich, real rich. Not just scraping by anymore. I am getting my surgery. Darius is paying off the shark, and we are going to live the life we deserve, finally free of that smelly old burden. Smelly old burden. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. I recorded it all, the glee, the greed, the absolute lack of humanity. I had enough. I had more than enough to bury them. I turned and walked away, my shuffle gone, replaced by the purposeful stride of a man on a mission. I walked back to the truck, my heart cold, my mind sharp. I opened the driver's side door and climbed in, closing it quietly. Mom was sitting exactly where I had left her, but she had taken off her sunglasses. Tears were streaming down her face, silent tracks of grief that cut through the powder on her cheeks. She wasn't looking at the house anymore. She was looking at her hands, her empty hands that used to hold those babies, that used to sew on that machine, that used to caress those pearls. Did you see it? She asked, her voice a whisper that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. I saw it, Mama, I said, starting the engine. I saw everything. She is wearing my necklace, she said, and her voice broke. She is wearing the pearls Henry gave me. I nodded, putting the truck in gear. I got it on tape. Mama, I got it all. She called you a burden, she said. She was glad you were gone. She sold your sewing machine for $20. Mom took a deep breath, a shuddering intake of air that seemed to rattle her small frame. She reached into her purse and pulled out a handkerchief, dabbing at her eyes. Then she stopped crying. She folded the handkerchief carefully and put it back. She put her sunglasses back on. She gripped her cane with both hands and looked straight ahead through the windshield. Drive Otis, she said, and her voice was no longer weak. It was steel. It was fire. It was the voice of judgment. Drive me away from here before I get out of this truck and beat her with this cane myself. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the vultures and the thieves behind, leaving the house that was no longer a home, leaving the brother who was no longer a brother. We drove in silence for a long time. The only sound, the hum of the tires on the pavement. Finally, Mom spoke again. Otis, she said, not looking at me. Yes, Mama. Tomorrow, she said, tomorrow at the church when I walk in there, I want you to make sure she is still wearing those pearls. Why, Mama? Because, she said, turning to look at me, a cold, hard smile touching her lips. Because I want to take them off her neck myself in front of God and everybody. I want to snatch them back, and I want to see the look on her face when she realizes she is stealing from a ghost. I smiled back, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. Don't worry, Mama, I said. I will make sure she wears them. I will send her a text right now telling her how nice she looked in them. I will bait the trap. We drove on, heading back to my place, heading back to the war room. Tomorrow was the funeral. Tomorrow was the day the dead would rise and the living would fall, and Amber and Darius had no idea that the smelly old burden was about to drop a ton of bricks on their heads. I parked my rusted Ford F-150 between a gleaming silver Bentley and a cherry red Porsche in the valet lot of the Gilded Lily. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus do not have prices and the waiters look at you like you are a stain on their shoe. If your suit cost less than $1,000, the valet, a young kid with pimples and a vest that was too big for him, looked at my truck with open disdain. He started to wave me away to tell me deliveries were in the back, but I just rolled down the window and handed him a $20 bill. "Keep it close, son," I said. "I won't be long." I walked toward the entrance, wiping the grease from my hands onto my coveralls. I hadn't bothered to change after the estate sale surveillance. I wanted them to see me like this. I wanted them to see Otis, the mechanic. Otis, the failure. Otis, the man who fixed other people's mistakes for a living. I wanted to look exactly like the nothing they thought I was, because it would make the taste of their defeat so much sweeter. Inside, the air smelled of truffles and old money. The lighting was dim and golden, designed to make rich women look younger and rich men look honest. The hostess took one look at my work boots and opened her mouth to tell me to leave, but I didn't give her the chance. "I am here for the king party," I said, my voice low and rumbling like a diesel engine private room in the back. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the security guard by the door. But there is something about the way a man carries himself when he owns the ground he walks on that makes people pause. I didn't wait for her permission. I walked past her, my heavy boots thudding against the plush carpet, ignoring the stares of the diners, who paused mid-bite to gawk at the intruder in the blue-collar uniform. I found them in the Diamond Room, a private enclave at the back of the restaurant, separated from the riffraff by heavy velvet curtains. I could hear the laughter before I even opened the drapes. It was the loud, raucous laughter of people who think they have gotten away with murder. Literally. I heard the pop of a champagne cork and the clink of crystal. I pushed the curtain aside and stepped into the room. The conversation died instantly. It was like someone had pulled the plug on a jukebox. There were about 12 people seated around a long table laden with seafood towers and bottles of Dom Perignon. But these weren't mourners. These weren't grieving friends, sharing stories of Hattie King. These were sharks. I recognized Vinny the Roach immediately. He was sitting to the right of Darius, wearing a suit that was too shiny and a watch that cost more than my house. He was eating a lobster tail with his hands grease shining on his chin. Vinny was the man holding the note on Darius's life, the $200,000 debt that was due on Tuesday. Sitting next to him were a couple of other low-level hustlers, guys who loaned money at 40% interest and broke legs for fun. And there at the head of the table were Darius and Amber. Darius looked like he was about to have a stroke. His face went from flush to ash gray. In a second, his eyes bulging out of his head, he dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his plate, ringing like a bell in the silence. Amber was the first to recover. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She was still wearing the black dress from the estate sale, and my mother's pearls were still around her neck, gleaming softly under the chandelier. She looked at me with a mixture of disgust and fury, her lip curling up in a sneer that showed her teeth. "What the hell are you doing here?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. "Security. Get security in here right now. Get this beggar out of my sight." I didn't move. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, looking at them. Darius stood up slowly, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, trying to regain some composure in front of his creditors, trying to act like the big shot he pretended to be. "Otis," he said, his voice shaking just a little, "this is a private event, a memorial dinner for Mom. You were told not to come." "A memorial?" I asked, looking at the empty bottles of champagne, looking at the lobster shells, looking at the lack of tears in the room. "It looks more like a celebration." "Darius, celebrating what exactly? The death of your mother or the payout you think is coming?" "Vinny." The Roach leaned back in his chair, picking his teeth with a shrimp claw. He looked at me, then he looked at Darius with a cold, amused smile. "Who is this Darius?" he asked, his voice like gravel. "Your gardener." Darius swallowed hard, sweat beading on his upper lip. "This is my brother Vinny. He is estrangement. Nobody, just a mechanic who thinks he is owed something. He is leaving right now." Amber marched around the table, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. She stopped a few feet from me, wrinkling her nose as if I smelled like a sewer. Look at you, she spat, looking me up and down with pure contempt. You look like trash. Otis, you smell like gasoline and desperation. Did you come here to beg? Is that it? Did you think if you showed up looking pathetic we would throw you a few scraps from the inheritance? Well, you thought wrong. You get nothing. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing. She was putting on a show for Vinny and the others, proving she was tough, proving she was in control, proving there was no way I was going to get a piece of the pie. She needed them to believe the money was secure. She needed them to believe I was a non-entity. I looked at her. I looked at the pearls around her neck, the pearls she had stolen from a woman she thought was dead, and I felt a calm settle over me, a cold, deadly calm. I didn't get angry. I didn't shout. I just reached into the pocket of my coveralls and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. I didn't come to beg, Amber. I said, my voice steady, soft enough that they had to lean in to hear me, and I didn't come to fight. I just came to pay my respects. I tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed right in front of Darius, sliding across the polished wood until it hit his wine glass. And to give you this, I added. Darius looked at the envelope like it was a bomb. What is this? He whispered. Just a little something to help you celebrate. I said, a contribution to the festivities. Good luck, Darius, you are going to need it. Amber snatched the envelope off the table before Darius could touch it. She held it up, sneering, looking at the plain exterior. She didn't open it. She didn't look inside to see the document I had prepared, the fake court summons regarding a lien on the house, a little piece of paper designed to make them sweat, designed to make them panic, designed to make them rush even faster into the trap. Instead, she ripped it in half. She ripped it right down the middle, the sound of the tearing paper loud in the room. She ripped it again and again, shredding it into confetti. She threw the pieces in my face, let them flutter down onto my dirty work boots like snow. We don't need your trash, Otis, she hissed. We don't need anything from you. We won, and you lost. Now get out of here and go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. I looked at the pieces of paper on the floor. I looked at Darius, who was staring at me with a mix of fear and relief. Relief that I hadn't made a scene, relief that I hadn't told Vinny the truth about the Will fear, because he knew deep down that I was not a man who walked away from a fight, but he didn't know the half of it. He didn't know that 3 hours ago, while he was throwing my family photos into a dumpster, I was sitting in the office of the First National Bank with the vice president, a man I had played poker with for 20 years. He didn't know that I had written a check, a cashier's check for $212,000, covering the principal and the interest on every single debt Darius owed to the bank debts that were about to go into default debts that were secured by the family house. He didn't know that I had bought his debt from the bank, and I had also made a side deal with a certain associate of Vinny's, buying out the street debt for pennies on the dollar because Vinny preferred cash today over a promise for Tuesday. I owned him. I owned every cent of debt he had. I was his creditor. I was the bank, and I was the shark. He thought he was celebrating his freedom, but he was actually drinking champagne in a cage I had just locked. I smiled at Amber, a slow smile that didn't reach my eyes. You are right, Amber, I said, backing away toward the curtain. You won, enjoy the night. Enjoy the champagne. Tell. Vinny, I said hello. Vinny stopped picking his teeth. He looked at me sharply, his eyes narrowing. He knew my name. He knew the reputation of Otis King from the old days, but he couldn't place it. He couldn't reconcile the mechanic in front of him with the legend he had heard, whispered in the back rooms of Atlanta. I saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. I turned and walked out through the curtain, leaving them to their party, leaving them to their false sense of security. I heard Amber laughing as I walked away, a high, shrill sound mocking me, mocking my clothes, mocking my poverty. Let her laugh, let them all laugh. I walked back through the restaurant, past the shocked hostess, past the diners eating their $50 steaks. I walked out into the night air and retrieved my truck from the kid valet, handing him another 20 because I felt generous. I climbed into the cab and started the engine. The rumble of the old Ford felt good beneath me, solid, real. I pulled out of the lot, glancing in the rearview mirror at the glowing windows of the Gilded Lily. They were in there, eating and drinking, thinking they were the kings of the world, thinking they had buried the past and secured the future. They had no idea that tomorrow at the funeral the bill would come due, and I would be the one collecting with interest. I sat in the dark of my home office, illuminated only by the blue glow of 3 high-definition monitors. The hum of the hard drives was a soothing rhythm, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on the screens in front of me. 5 years ago, when Mom first started showing signs of slowing down, I had installed a state-of-the-art security system in the family house, hidden cameras in the smoke detectors, microphones, in the light fixtures, motion sensors that tracked every movement. I did not do it to spy on Mom. I did it to protect her because I knew that one day the wolves would come scratching at the door. I just never expected the wolves to have keys. On the center monitor, the feed from the dining room was crystal clear. Darius and Amber were sitting at the mahogany table, the same table where we used to eat Sunday dinner after church, the table where Dad used to read his newspaper. It was covered in papers. Now, legal documents, bank statements, and a bottle of expensive scotch that Darius had probably liberated from my father's liquor cabinet. Darius looked like a man on the edge of a cliff, sweating, shaking, loosening his tie as if it were a noose. Amber, on the other hand, looked like a general on the eve of battle, cool, precise, and terrifyingly focused. I turned up the volume on the speakers, catching every scratch of the pen against the paper, every clink of the ice in the glass, every word of the conspiracy that was being hatched in the sanctuary of my childhood home. "Focus!" Darius. Amber snapped, her voice cutting through the static. She was standing over him, one hand resting on the back of his chair, the other holding a cigarette that trailed smoke into the air. "Tomorrow is the big day. Tomorrow we put the old witch in the ground and we claim what is ours. Do not mess this up." Darius wiped his forehead with his sleeve, looking down at the document in front of him. It was a last will and testament drawn up on cheap legal paper printed from some online template. "I cannot do it, Amber," he whined, his voice trembling. "Look at my hand. I am shaking too much. It does not look like her signature. It looks like a forgery." "It is a forgery, you idiot," Amber hissed, snatching the pen from his hand. "But it is a necessary one. Nobody knows what her signature looked like at the end. She was 95. Darius, her hand shook too, if anyone asks. We say she was weak. We say she struggled to hold the pen, but she was determined to leave everything to her favorite son. Now stop whining and sign the damn paper." She shoved the pen back into his hand. Darius took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He pressed the tip to the paper. I zoomed in on the feed, watching the ink bleed into the fiber, watching my brother commit a felony in high definition, he wrote. Hattie King slowly, agonizingly trying to mimic the elegant script of a woman who had taught school for 40 years, trying to steal her legacy with a few strokes of a ballpoint pen. "There," Amber said, snatching the paper away and blowing on the ink to dry it. "That wasn't so hard, was it? Now, listen to me and listen. Good. The real estate agent called me an hour ago, the buyer from California, the one who wants to tear it down and build condos. He wired the deposit. Darius, $50,000. It is sitting in my offshore account right now." 50,000. Darius looked up. Hope warring with fear in his bloodshot eyes. He really sent it. He sent it. Amber confirmed, a predatory smile spreading across her face, and the rest of the 450,000 lands on Tuesday. As soon as we show him the deed and the death certificate, we are selling this dump immediately. Darius, as soon as the funeral is over, we sign the closing papers and we are gone. We take the money and we go to Miami. I get my surgery, you pay off Vinny, and we never have to look at this dusty old town again. I leaned back in my chair, watching them celebrate, watching them toast to the sale of a house they did not own. The buyer from California was real enough, but he wasn't buying the house from them. He had been negotiating with my holding company for months, thinking he was dealing with a corporate entity, thinking the house was empty. Amber had intercepted a letter meant for the company and had spun a lie, claiming she was the owner, claiming she could sell it fast for cash. She had taken a $50,000 deposit for a property. I held the title too. She had just committed grand larceny on top of fraud. But what about Otis? Darius asked, the fear returning to his voice, choking his celebration. He was at the restaurant. Amber, he knows something. He looked confident. He threw that envelope at me like he owned the place. What if he shows up tomorrow? What if he makes a scene? What if he demands to see the will? Amber slammed her glass down on the table, the sound echoing through my speakers. "Forget Otis," she spat. "He is a broke mechanic living in a shack. He has no money for lawyers. He has no power. He is just jealous. Because Mom loved you more. He is not just jealous." Darius insisted. "He is dangerous. You didn't see his eyes. Amber, he looked at me like I was already dead. If he shows up," Amber said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper, "if he dares to show his face at that church, we destroy him, Darius. We don't just kick him out. We ruin him." "How?" Darius asked. "We lie. Amber said simply. We tell everyone he beat her. The air in my office seemed to freeze. I stopped breathing. My hand hovering over the mouse beat her. Darius repeated, his voice filled with shock. Beat Mom? Yes, Amber said, pacing the room. Now energized by her own malice, we tell the police, we tell the guests, we tell the judge. If he tries to contest the will, we say he was abusive. We say that is why she cut him out. We say he used to come over drunk and smack her around. We say she was terrified of him. We say that is why we had to put her in the nursing home to protect her from him. But that is not true, Darius whispered. Even he seemed horrified by the depth of the lie. Otis never touched her. He loved her. Who cares? What is true? Amber screamed, getting in his face. Who cares? Darius, do you want to go to jail? Do you want Vinny to break your legs? Do you want to be poor for the rest of your life? Because that is the alternative. If Otis gets his hands on this house, we are finished. So you have to make a choice. Darius, are you going to be a man and do what is necessary to survive, or are you going to let your brother destroy us? Darius looked at her, looked at the fake will, looked at the bottle of scotch. He swallowed hard, and then I saw the light in his eyes die. I saw the last scrap of decency wither away. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said softly. Okay. We say he beat her. We say she was afraid. Good, Amber said, smoothing his collar, rewarding her dog for obeying the command. Now drink your scotch and get some sleep. We have a big performance tomorrow. You have to be the grieving son, Darius. You have to cry. You have to shake. You have to make them believe you are broken. Because if they believe you are broken, they won't look too closely at the cracks. She kissed him on the forehead, a kiss of death, and walked out of the room, leaving him alone with his guilt and his bottle. Darius poured himself another glass, his hands shaking so badly he spilled half of it on the table, on the fake will, on the lie he had just signed. I stopped the recording and saved the file to 3 different secure servers. I sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the computers, feeling a cold rage settle into my bones. They were going to accuse me of abusing the woman I worshipped. They were going to drag my name through the mud to cover their crimes. They were going to use the memory of my mother as a shield for their greed. I picked up the phone and called Jamal. Wake up, I said. I know it is late, but we have a change of plans. Otis, Jamal mumbled sleepily. What is it? They are going to accuse me of abuse. I said, my voice steady. They are going to claim I beat Mom to justify the will and the restraining order. There was a silence on the line, then the sound of Jamal sitting up, the rustle of sheets. You have proof? He asked sharply. I have it on video, I said. I have them conspiring. I have the forgery. I have the deposit from the buyer. I have everything. Okay, Jamal, said his voice crisp now, fully awake. That changes the civil suit. Otis, that makes it defamation of character, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and filing a false police report. If they actually go through with it, we can bury them under the jail. Let them do it, I said. Let them say the words, Jamal. Let them stand in the church and say it into the microphone. I want everyone to hear it. I want the congregation to hear it. I want the police to hear it, because when I bring Mom out, I want the lie to be so big that it crushes them when it falls. I will have the sheriff ready. Jamal said, I will have the warrants drafted. We will let them dig the hole, Otis, but be careful if they are desperate enough to frame you. They are desperate enough to do anything. I know, I said, watching Darius pass out on the dining room table, head on his arms, surrounded by the evidence of his treason. I know exactly who they are, Jamal, and tomorrow everyone else will too. I hung up and turned off the monitors. The screen went black, plunging the room into darkness. I sat there for a long time thinking about my brother, thinking about the boy I used to protect from bullies on the playground, thinking about the man who had just agreed to destroy me for money. I felt a profound sadness, a grief for the brother I had lost long ago, but underneath the sadness was the steel resolution of a man who knows what must be done. I went upstairs to check on Mom. She was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. The pearl necklace, the one Amber had stolen and worn, was gone from her neck in my mind, replaced by the image of Amber wearing it like a trophy tomorrow. I would get it back. Tomorrow I would take back everything they had stolen, the house, the money, the name, the dignity. I went to my own room and laid out my suit. I polished my shoes until they shone like mirrors. I checked the pocket of my jacket, making sure the photos and the flash drive were there. I was ready. The script was written. The stage was set. The actors knew their lines, even if they didn't know the ending. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow was the funeral, and tomorrow the King family would have a reckoning that would be talked about in Atlanta for 100 years. The morning of the funeral was gray and heavy, the kind of Atlanta humidity that sticks your shirt to your back before you even step off the porch. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the silk tie that Mom had bought me for my 50th birthday. My suit was black, bespoke, Italian wool, cut to fit shoulders that had carried the weight of a union and a family for decades. I looked at my reflection, and I didn't see an old man. I saw a wrecking ball. I checked my pockets, the flash drive with the evidence, the phone ready to stream to the cloud, and a clean white handkerchief, because even in war, a gentleman comes prepared. I drove the truck to the First Baptist Church of Decatur, a sprawling red brick fortress where our family had worshipped for 3 generations. The parking lot was full, which was the first sign of the farce. Darius didn't have this many friends, and Mom had outlived most of hers. I parked in the back near the service entrance where Jamal and the security team were waiting. They looked like a small army, 6 men, wide as barn doors, wearing suits that cost more than Darius's debt, dressed in black, wearing earpieces, looking like they belonged guarding a president, not a mechanic. I slipped into the vestibule just as the organ music swelled into a mournful dirge. I stayed in the shadows, watching through the cracked double doors. The sanctuary was packed, but the faces were wrong. I didn't recognize the women in the front row, dabbing their eyes with lace handkerchiefs. I didn't know the men in the ill-fitting suits, looking solemn and bored. I realized with a sick twist in my gut that these were extras. Darius had hired a casting agency. He had filled the pews with strangers to make himself look like a beloved son, burying a beloved mother. He had turned my mother's homegoing into a Broadway production funded by stolen credit cards. Darius walked up to the pulpit, his steps heavy and slow, a masterpiece of physical acting. He gripped the sides of the wooden podium, hanging his head as if the grief were too heavy to bear. He looked out at the sea of strangers and let a single tear roll down his cheek. He spoke, his voice cracking perfectly. "My mother. Hattie King was a saint," he began, and lightning didn't strike him down, which was proof enough that God has a sense of humor or infinite patience. "She was my rock, my heart," he continued, looking at the urn that sat on a pedestal surrounded by white lilies, an urn that contained absolutely nothing but lies, and maybe some kitty litter, just like I suspected. "I cared for her until the very end," he lied, his voice gaining strength, finding the rhythm of the con. "I sat by her bedside every night at Silver Oaks, holding her hand, feeding her spoonful by spoonful when she was too weak to lift her arm. I wiped her brow, I read her scriptures. I gave up everything, my career, my time, my life, just to make sure her final days were full of love, because that is what a son does." He stepped down, collapsing into the arms of Amber, who held him like he was a wounded soldier. She patted his back, looking over his shoulder at the congregation, making sure everyone was watching her performance. She released him and glided up to the microphone. The pearls. My mother's pearls glowing against her black designer dress. She looked like a black widow spider, sleek and deadly. She didn't use notes. She spoke from the heart, or whatever dark void she had where a heart should be. "Mom. Hattie always told me I was the daughter she never had," she said, her voice soft and breathy. "She told me I was the light in her old age. We used to sit for hours just talking about life, about love. She trusted me with her deepest secrets. She trusted me with her legacy." I remember the last night she looked at me and said, "Amber, take care of my Darius. He is the good one. He is the one who stayed. Promise me you will keep the house in the family. Promise me you won't let anyone take it away." The audacity was breathtaking. She was using a dead woman's voice to validate her theft. She was rewriting history in real time, cementing her claim on the estate in front of 100 witnesses. She wiped her eyes elegantly, careful not to smudge her mascara, and looked up at the stained glass window as if expecting a dove to descend. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered into the microphone. "Thank you for loving me." That was the cue. That was the moment the tension in the vestibule snapped tight. Jamal looked at me and nodded. I looked at the security team leader, a man named Tiny, who was anything but ready. I asked. "Ready," he rumbled. I signaled to the ushers, 2 young men who looked terrified of the large men in suits. "Stand aside." "Son," I said, my voice low. They scrambled out of the way. I reached out and placed my hands on the heavy oak doors. The wood felt cool and solid beneath my palms. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of incense and hypocrisy. Then I pushed. The doors boom open, hitting the backstops with a sound like a gunshot. The noise echoed through the vaulted ceiling, cutting through the hushed reverence of the church. Heads turned, gasps rippled through the pews like a wave. Darius jumped, nearly knocking over the fake urn. Amber froze her hand, flying to her throat, clutching the pearls as if they were burning her. I didn't walk in alone. The security team moved first 6 men in dark suits, moving with military precision. They didn't walk, they marched, forming a V formation, a flying wedge of intimidation that split the congregation down the center aisle. They pushed aside the hired mourners, clearing a path wide enough for a tank, wide enough for the truth. I walked in the center of the V, my steps slow and deliberate. The sound of my shoes on the stone floor distinct and heavy. Click, clack, click, clack. I wasn't Otis the mechanic anymore. I wasn't the brother who lived in a shack. I was Otis King, the man who had stared down mobsters and politicians. I kept my eyes locked on the pulpit, locked on the 2 liars who were standing there watching their meticulously crafted play fall apart. Darius looked at me, and his face went from grief to terror. In a heartbeat, he gripped the edge of the pulpit, his knuckles white. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Get him out of here!" He screamed, his voice cracking high and hysterical. "Security, get him out. He is not allowed here." Amber rallied faster. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. "You," she shrieked, "how dare you show your face here after what you did? Get out, Otis. Get out before the police drag you away. You abandoned her. You beat her. You are dead to this family." I didn't stop walking. I didn't say a word. I just kept coming. The security team parting the sea of confusion before me. The hired actors looked around, unsure if this was part of the show or something real, something dangerous. Whispers broke out. "Who is that? Is that the other brother? I thought he was in jail. Look at those bodyguards." We reached the front of the church. The security team fanned out, forming a wall between the pews and the altar, blocking the exits, blocking any escape. I stepped forward, standing at the foot of the steps, looking up at Darius and Amber. They looked small up there, surrounded by their lies and their stolen flowers. "You want to talk about abandonment, Darius," I said, my voice booming without a microphone, filling the space with the resonance of command. "You want to talk about beatings? Amber, let's talk about Silver Oaks. Let's talk about the 2 months you left her there without paying a dime. Let's talk about the pneumonia lie. Let's talk about the $5,000 you paid Dr. Vance to sign a death certificate for a woman you haven't seen in 3 years. Darius stepped back, knocking into the pedestal. The fake urn wobbled dangerously. "He is lying," he shouted to the crowd. "He is crazy. He is grieving and he has lost his mind. Don't listen to him." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the remote control for the projection screen that was rolled up above the choir loft. Every modern church has one now for hymns and announcements. Darius had probably planned to show a slideshow of fake memories later. I pointed the remote and pressed the button. The screen descended slowly, humming as it lowered the lights in the church, dimmed automatically, casting Darius and Amber in shadow. While the screen brightened, I pressed play. The video was grainy at first, the night vision from the security camera in my dining room, but the audio was crystal clear. Amber's voice filled the church, amplified by the sound system, shrill and cruel. "If he shows up, we lie, we tell everyone he beat her, we say he was abusive, we say that is why she cut him out." The congregation gasped, the sound sucking the air out of the room. Amber stared at the screen, her mouth open, her face pale as a sheet. Darius looked like he was going to vomit. He looked for an exit, but my men were blocking the side doors. I pressed another button. The next clip played the estate sale, Amber holding the wine glass, the pearls around her neck. "Finally, the old hag is gone. Shelley, you have no idea what a relief it is to breathe fresh air in this house again. It smelled like old people and cabbage and death." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Amber looked at the crowd, her eyes wide with panic. "It is fake," she screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. "It is a deep fake. He used AI. He is trying to frame us." I stopped the video and looked at her, looked at the pearls she was still clutching. "You can fake a video, Amber," I said, my voice calm, cold, deadly, "but you can't fake the truth. And you certainly can't fake a resurrection." I turned back to the doors of the church, the doors that were still open, the sunlight streaming in, creating a halo around the silhouette that was waiting there. "Bring her in," I said into the silence. The silence that followed my command was heavy enough to crush bone. I turned back toward the massive oak doors of the church. the sunlight pouring in from the outside world, creating a blinding rectangle of white light against the dim religious gloom of the sanctuary. For a moment there was nothing, just the dust motes dancing in the beam and the sound of traffic far off in the distance, unsuspecting of the miracle that was about to occur inside. Then a shape detached itself from the brightness, a silhouette that every person in that room knew in their bones, even if their minds refused to accept it. Two of my security guards stepped forward, pushing a wheelchair with the reverence reserved for royalty. Seated in that chair was not a corpse, it was not a ghost. It was Hattie Mae King, dressed in her finest lavender silk Sunday best, the dress she had saved for 20 years for a special occasion, though she had always assumed that occasion would be her meeting with the Lord. Not a confrontation with her son on her head, sat a hat that was a masterpiece of millinery, a wide-brimmed creation adorned with silk flowers, and a delicate veil that did not hide the fire in her eyes. Her hands, clad in white lace gloves, gripped the handle of her polished oak cane like it was a scepter. I walked back down the aisle to meet her, taking the handles of the chair from the guard. I felt the vibration of the wheels on the stone floor traveling up through my arms, a connection between mother and son that was stronger than any lie Darius could spin. I began to push her forward slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to look, giving everyone time to process the impossible. The sound of the rubber wheels rolling over the slate floor was a rhythmic hush, hush, hush that seemed to chant an accusation. With every revolution, heads turned in the pews, eyes widened to the size of saucers, mouths dropped open in silent screams. The hired mourners, the extras, Darius had paid to fill the seats, looked around in confusion, wondering if this was part of the script, wondering if this was some avant-garde theater they hadn't been warned about. But the few real people in the room, the old deacons, the church mothers, the people who had known Hattie for 50 years, they knew, they gasped, clutching their chests, crossing themselves, whispering prayers for protection against spirits. Darius was the first to break. The microphone slipped from his sweating fingers, hitting the floor with a deafening screech of feedback that tore through the church like a banshee wail. He clapped his hands over his ears, doubling over, but his eyes never left the figure approaching him. Up the center aisle, he looked like a man watching his own executioner walk into the room. His face went from the pale gray of fear to a sickly, translucent white. He started to shake, a violent, full-body tremor that rattled the podium he was holding onto for support. "It is not real," he gibbered, his voice picked up by the microphone lying on the floor, amplifying his terror for all to hear. "It is a trick. It is a hologram. Otis is doing this. It is not real. She is dead. She is dead. I burned her." Amber reacted with the feral instinct of a cornered animal. She screamed a high, piercing shriek that shattered the sanctity of the church. "Ma," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the wheelchair. "Qui, get it away from me. It is a demon. It is a haint. Somebody help me." She stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the hem of her dress. She grabbed onto the altar rail, her knuckles white, her eyes bulging. She looked at the congregation, pleading for sanity, pleading for someone to tell her that the woman she had robbed and discarded was not rolling toward her with judgment in her eyes. I did not stop. I kept pushing the wheelchair, the wheels eating up the distance between truth and lies, between justice and greed. We reached the front of the church. The security team formed a semicircle behind us, blocking the aisle, blocking the escape, creating an arena for the final act. I set the brake on the wheelchair with a solid click. Mom looked up at me through her veil and nodded once it was time. Darius was sobbing now, snot running down his face, a pathetic ruin of a man. "No, it can't be. I have the certificate. I have the ashes. Look at the urn. The urn is right there. She is in the jar." Mom reached out and gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. Her arms were thin, but the muscles were corded with the strength of a woman who had raised 2 boys alone, who had scrubbed floors and carried burdens that would break a lesser person. She pushed herself up. The church went dead silent. The air sucked out of the room by the sheer force of her will. She stood up, her legs shaking slightly but holding firm. She straightened her back, rising to her full height, small but imposing, a giant in a lavender dress. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at Darius. She took a step forward, the sound of her cane hitting the stone floor echoing like a gavel. Strike, clack. She took another step, clack. She was moving toward the altar, moving toward the pedestal where the fake urn sat, surrounded by the white lilies Darius had bought with stolen money. She reached the pedestal. Darius cowered behind it, using the symbol of his mother's death as a shield against his mother's life. "Stay back," he whimpered. "Don't touch me." You are a ghost." Mom didn't say a word. She raised her cane, holding it like a baseball bat, like a weapon of righteousness. She looked at the urn, that polished brass jar that was supposed to contain her earthly remains, the prop in Darius's con, the centerpiece of his lie. With a grunt of effort, she swung the cane. The sound of the wood connecting with the brass was a dull, heavy thud. The urn flew off the pedestal, spinning through the air in a slow arc. Time seemed to slow down. Everyone watched it fall. Darius watched it. Amber watched it. The congregation watched it. Chwang! The urn hit the stone floor and burst open, the lid popping off with the force of the impact. But it wasn't gray ash that spilled out. It wasn't the fine dust of cremated bone. It was gravel. It was gray, clumping clay granules that slid across the polished floor, creating a dusty cloud that rose into the air. Cat litter. Cheap, generic supermarket cat litter, mixed with a little gravel from the driveway to give it weight. Darius hadn't even bothered to use sand or dirt. He had used the cheapest thing he could find to represent his mother's body. The insult was so profound, so absolute, that a collective gasp of horror went up from the pews. Even the hired actors looked sickened. The disrespect was visceral. It was a physical blow to everyone in the room. Mom looked down at the pile of kitty litter, at the dust settling on her polished shoes. She looked at it with a detached curiosity, as if examining a bug. Then she looked up at Darius, her eyes burning through the veil. She reached out and picked up the microphone from the floor where Darius had dropped it. She blew into it once, a sharp sound that made everyone jump. She didn't shout, she didn't scream, she didn't need to. Her voice was the voice of a schoolteacher who has caught a student in a lie, the voice of a mother who is done forgiving. "I am not dead," she said. Her voice clear and strong, amplified by the speakers reaching every corner of the church, reaching up to the rafters. "I am not a ghost, Darius. And I am certainly not a pile of cat litter in a brass jar." Darius slid down the front of the podium, collapsing to his knees in the pile of litter, ruining his expensive suit. Kneeling in the evidence of his crime. "Mama," he choked out. "Mama, please, I can explain. I didn't mean it." "Stop!" Mom commanded, her voice cracking like a whip. She stepped closer to him, towering over him as he groveled. She looked down at him, not with love, not with pity, but with a cold, hard clarity that was terrifying to behold. "You pushed me into a home, Darius," she said, recounting his sins one by one. "You left me there to rot. You stopped paying the bills, hoping they would throw me on the street or that I would die of neglect. You never visited, you never called, you waited like a vulture on a branch, waiting for my heart to stop beating so you could pick my bones clean." "No, Mama. No." Darius sobbed, clutching at the hem of her dress, trying to touch her, trying to find some purchase. It was Amber. "She made me do it," she said. "We needed the money." Mom pulled her dress away from his grasping fingers, as if his touch were contagious. She looked over at Amber, who was still clinging to the altar, rail shaking like a leaf, her face a mask of ruined makeup and terror. Mom looked at the pearls around Amber's neck, the pearls my father had given her, the pearls Amber had worn to the estate sale. "And you," she said to Amber, her voice dropping an octave, "you wore my necklace, you drank wine in my house and called me a smelly old burden, you sold my sewing machine for $20, you planned to gut my home and paint it white to erase me." Amber couldn't speak. She just shook her head, mouthing the word no over and over again, trapped in her own nightmare. Mom turned back to Darius, looking down at her son kneeling in the cat litter. She took a deep breath, drawing herself up. She looked like a queen passing a death sentence. "I am not dead," she repeated, her voice ringing out like a bell. "But you are Darius to me. You are dead. The son I raised, the boy I loved, the man I hoped you would be. He died a long time ago, killed by your greed and your weakness." She leaned down, getting close to his face so he couldn't look away, so he had to see the life in her eyes, so he had to see the mother he had betrayed. "I did not come here to be buried, Darius," she whispered into the microphone, the sound intimate and devastating. "I came here to bury you. I came here to bury the love I had for you. I came here to bury the bond between mother and son, because you broke it, Darius. You broke it for money, you broke it for a lie, and you broke it forever." She straightened up and looked at the congregation, at the sea of shocked faces looking back at her. "This funeral is over," she announced, her voice final. "This show is closed. Go home, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell everyone what you saw here today. Tell them that Hattie King is alive, and tell them that her son is a thief and a liar, who tried to sell his mother for an insurance check. She dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a thud that sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. She turned around and held out her arm to me. I stepped forward and took her arm, feeling the tremors running through her body now that the adrenaline was fading. But she didn't collapse. She held her head high. "Take me home." "Otis," she said loudly enough for Darius to hear, "take me to my house, the one that belongs to us, not to him." We walked back down the aisle, leaving Darius kneeling in the litter, leaving Amber clinging to the rail, leaving the ruins of their conspiracy behind us. The silence was absolute as we walked out into the bright sunlight, into the living world, leaving the dead things behind in the dark. Amber's scream tore through the stunned silence of the sanctuary like a jagged piece of glass. She was not giving up. She was a creature of pure survival. Instinct, a rat cornered in a trap that would gnaw off its own leg to escape. She pointed a manicured finger at my mother, at the woman standing amidst the ruins of her own funeral service, and she lied with a desperation that was almost impressive. "She is a fake," Amber shrieked, her voice bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "Do not listen to her. Look at her. She is an actress. Otis hired her to steal the inheritance. Hattie King is dead. I saw her die. I held her hand. This is a scam. This is a sick, twisted game to rob a grieving son. Arrest her. Arrest them both. She is senile. She is crazy. She doesn't know who she is." The congregation shifted uneasily, the hired mourners looking from Amber to Mom, unsure of the script, unsure of reality for a second. Doubt flickered in the air. Amber was loud. She was convincing in her hysteria. She was playing on the confusion of the moment. She was trying to turn the resurrection into a conspiracy theory. She grabbed Darius by the shoulder, shaking him hard. "Tell them, Darius. Tell them she is an imposter. Tell them your mother is dead." Darius looked up, his eyes swimming with tears and confusion. He looked at Amber, then at Mom. He was trapped between the lie he had lived and the truth standing in front of him. He opened his mouth to speak to, maybe double down on the lie to save his skin. But I didn't give him the chance. I wasn't going to let them debate my mother's existence. I wasn't going to let this become a, she said, argument in the court of public opinion. I had the receipts, and I was going to show them all. I stepped forward, the remote control still heavy in my hand. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, I just looked at Amber with a pity that must have burned her. "More than hate, you want proof, Amber?" I asked, my voice low but amplified by the acoustics of the room. "You want everyone to know who is faking it? Fine. Let's look at the outtakes." I pointed the remote at the giant screen hovering above the choir loft. The screen that was meant to show hymns and scriptures but was now the canvas for their destruction. I pressed the button. The image flickered and changed the date stamp in the corner, read 2 days ago. The location was the dining room of the family house. The picture was high definition, clear enough to see the sweat on Darius's forehead, clear enough to see the label on the scotch bottle. The audio boomed through the church speakers, Darius's voice thick with alcohol and fear. "I cannot do it." "Amber, look at my hand. I am shaking too much. It does not look like her signature. It looks like a forgery." Then Amber's voice, sharp and controlling, cutting through his whining. "It is a forgery, you idiot, but it is a necessary one. Nobody knows what her signature looked like at the end. She was 95. Darius, stop whining and sign the damn paper." The gasp from the pews was visceral. People covered their mouths. The few real church members present looked at each other in horror, witnessing the anatomy of a crime laid bare on the altar of God. Amber stopped screaming. She stared at the screen, her face frozen in a rictus of terror. She saw herself instructing her husband to commit a felony. She saw herself concocting the narrative of the frail dying woman. She saw her own soul exposed, and it was ugly. I didn't stop there. I pressed the button again. The scene changed. It was Amber on her cell phone, pacing the living room, wearing my mother's pearls, sipping wine, holding a cigarette. The timestamp was yesterday morning. "Yes, Shelley," she said on the screen, her voice dripping with malice. "Finally, the old hag is gone. You have no idea what a relief it is to breathe fresh air in this house again. It smelled like old people and cabbage and death for years. I thought she would never die. I thought she was going to outlive us all just to spite me." The profanity of it. The sheer disrespect rang out in the holy space, making the very air feel dirty. The real Hattie King stood there watching herself being spoken of as garbage, watching the woman she had welcomed into her family wish for her death, celebrate her absence. Mom didn't look away. She watched the screen with a stoic calm, absorbing the hate, letting it fuel her strength. I pressed the button one last time. This was the kill shot. This was the clip from Dr. Vance's office, the audio I had recorded on my phone when Jamal and I paid him a visit. I hadn't synced the video, but the audio was enough. Vance's voice terrified and pleading. He paid me $5,000. Otis $5,000 cash, the wife Amber. She was the one who insisted on the pneumonia, 'cause she said it had to be infectious. She said they needed an excuse to cremate the body immediately without a viewing. The recording ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. There was no room for doubt anymore. There was no room for accusations of fake actors or senility. The truth was absolute, naked, and undeniable. Amber stood there, stripped of her defenses, stripped of her lies. She looked small. She looked cheap. She looked exactly like what she was, a thief caught with her hand in the jar. The security guards moved a step closer, tightening the circle, not touching them, just existing as a wall of consequences. Darius was still on his knees in the cat litter, staring at the floor as if he wished it would open up and swallow him whole. He was broken, the weight of the evidence crushing the last of his resistance. Mom moved, then she handed her cane to me. I took it, surprised she didn't need it. She didn't need support. She was fueled by a power that came from a place beyond physical strength. She walked toward Darius, her steps steady, her lavender dress rustling softly. She stopped right in front of him, blocking the light, casting a shadow over her fallen son. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice not loud but possessing the weight of a mountain. "Look at me, Darius." He raised his head slowly, his eyes red and swollen, his face streaked with tears and snot. He looked at her and then he looked away, unable to hold her gaze, unable to face the judgment in her eyes. I said, "Look at me," she said, sharper this time, demanding the respect he had denied her for years. He looked up, trembling, his lip quivering like a child's. "Mama," he whispered. "Mama, I am sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. I owed money. Mama, they were going to kill me." Mom stared down at him, her face impassive. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't offer forgiveness. She offered him the mirror of his own actions. "You owed money," she repeated flatly, "so you decided to pay with my life. You decided my breath was the currency for your gambling debts. You decided my home was the collateral for your mistakes. I didn't think you would know," he sobbed. A pathetic excuse that only made it worse. "I thought you were gone anyway. I thought you were sick. You thought I was disposable," she corrected him, leaning down, her face inches from his. "You thought I was a resource to be mined, not a mother to be loved. You thought you could erase 95 years of life with a fake certificate and a bag of kitty litter." She reached out her hand, hovering near his face for a second. I thought she was going to touch his cheek. I thought the mother in her was going to surface. I thought she was going to offer mercy. But Hattie King was a woman of the Old Testament, a woman of fire and brimstone. She wasn't there to comfort. She was there to correct. She drew back her hand, her palm flat and hard, and she swung. The sound of the slap was louder than the gunshot door opening. It was a crack, like a whip, a thunderclap that echoed through the sanctuary. Her hand connected with his cheek with all the force of her betrayal, with all the weight of her disappointment. Darius's head snapped to the side, the force of the blow knocking him off balance, sending him sprawling further into the gray dust on the floor. The crowd gasped again, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was a moment of pure biblical justice, the matriarch disciplining the prodigal son, not with a fatted calf, but with the back of her hand. Mom stood over him, breathing hard, her hand stinging but steady. She looked at him, clutching his cheek, looking up at her in shock, and then she delivered the words that would haunt him for the rest of his miserable life. "You sold me," she said, her voice shaking with the effort of holding back a scream. "You sold me for $500,000. You put a price tag on the woman who gave you life. You put a price tag on the woman who wiped your tears and fed you when you were hungry." She took a step closer, her shoe crunching on the gravel. "I raised you with milk, Darius." She hissed, the words pouring out of her like lava. "I raised you with the milk from my own body. I raised you with sweat and prayer and love. I gave you everything I had. I gave you a name. I gave you a history. And this is how you pay me back." She pointed at the mess on the floor, the gray granules sticking to his expensive suit, the dust coating his shoes. "You pay me back with cat litter," she roared, the anger finally breaking through the control. "You replace me with gravel and waste. You bury me in dirt while I am still breathing. You are not my son, Darius. You are a stranger, you are a thief, and you are a fool." Darius curled into a ball, sobbing uncontrollably, broken by the truth, broken by the slap, broken by the weight of what he had done. Amber tried to move, tried to sneak away toward the side door, thinking everyone was focused on Darius, thinking she could slip into the shadows. "Not you," Mom said without turning around, sensing the movement like a predator senses prey. "Don't you move a muscle, girl." Amber froze one foot in the air, looking like a statue of guilt. Mom turned, slowly pivoting to face her daughter-in-law, the woman who had orchestrated the whole thing, the architect of the nightmare. "Otis," Mom said, holding out her hand. I knew what she wanted. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo I had retrieved from the dumpster. The photo of Mom holding baby Darius. The photo Amber had thrown away like trash. I walked over and placed it in Mom's hand. She held it up, showing it to Amber, showing it to the room. "Look at this," she said, her voice quieter now but no less dangerous. "This is what you threw away, Amber. This is what you called garbage. My memories, my life, my love. You threw it in a dumpster to make room for your white paint and your tourists." Amber started to cry, ugly, hitching sobs, begging without words. "Please, Hattie," she choked out, "please don't." Mom walked up to her, invading her space, forcing Amber to look at her. "Give me my pearls," she said, her voice like ice. Amber fumbled at her neck, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't work the clasp. She clawed at her throat, desperate to get the necklace off, desperate to get rid of the evidence here. She stammered, pulling it free, tearing a few strands of hair in the process. "Here, take them. I am sorry." Mom snatched the necklace from her hand, holding the pearls up to the light, checking them for damage, checking to see if the taint of Amber's skin had dulled their luster. She put them in her pocket, safe next to her heart. "You aren't sorry you got caught," Mom said, dismissing her, turning her back on her, dismissing her existence, turning back to the congregation, turning back to the world. She looked at the hired mourners, the strangers in the pews. "Get out," she said. "Get out of my church, get out of my funeral, take your fake tears and your paid grief and go." They scrambled, tripping over themselves to get to the exits, fleeing the wrath of Hattie King. The church emptied out, leaving only the family, the security and the wreckage of the lie. Darius lay on the floor, a heap of misery. Amber leaned against the altar rail, defeated. I stepped up to Mom, placing a hand on her shoulder. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading, leaving her tired, leaving her old. "You did good, Mama," I whispered. "You did good." She looked at me, her eyes wet but clear. "Call the police, Otis," she said, looking at Darius one last time. "Call them and tell them to come pick up their trash. I am done here." I nodded, pulling out my phone, dialing the number I had already queued up. Mom turned and walked toward her wheelchair, her head high, her dignity intact, leaving her son in the dust he had bought, leaving him to the justice he deserved. The sound of sirens cutting through the humid Atlanta air was not a surprise to me. It was a scheduled appointment. I had called Detective Reynolds 2 hours ago, right before I put Mom in the truck. I told him exactly where to find the people who had forged a federal document and attempted to defraud an insurance company out of $500,000. I told him to give us time. I told him to let the service start, let the lie be told, and then come in to sweep up the garbage. The sirens grew louder, a wailing chorus of judgment getting closer and closer, until the blue and red lights began to flash against the stained glass windows, turning the saints and angels into flickering neon ghosts. Darius heard them, and he stopped sobbing. He lifted his head from the pile of cat litter, his face streaked with gray dust and snot, and he looked toward the open doors with the expression of a man waking up from a nightmare, only to realize he is still falling. Amber stopped shaking the altar rail. She straightened up, smoothing her dress, trying to compose herself, trying to find a mask that would work for this new audience. But it was too late. The mask was shattered on the floor along with the fake urn. The police did not wait for an invitation. This time, 4 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in cheap suits walked through the doors. My security team stepped aside, professional courtesy. Recognizing the lawful authority, the officers moved with a grim purpose, their hands resting near their belts, their eyes scanning the room, assessing the threats, seeing only a broken man on the floor and a terrified woman trying to blend into the woodwork. Detective Reynolds walked straight down the center aisle, his shoes crunching on the stray granules of litter that had scattered that far. He was a big man with a face like a worn leather saddle, and eyes that had seen every kind of lie this city could produce. He stopped in front of the altar, looking at Darius, then at Amber, then at me. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement of the tip-off. Then he turned his attention to the happy couple. Darius King and Amber King. He said, his voice flat and bored, reading from a mental script he had recited 1,000 times. "You are under arrest." Darius scrambled backward on his knees, Crab walking away from the detective, away from the cuffs, away from the reality of his life crashing down. "Wait," he stammered, holding up his hands, his palms gray with dust. "Wait, there is a mistake. We are grieving. This is a funeral. You cannot arrest people at a funeral." "This is not a funeral," Reynolds said, looking at the pile of gravel and the empty brass jar. "This is a crime scene, and you are not grieving. You are grifting. You are under arrest for forgery of a federal document, specifically a death certificate wire fraud for the electronic transmission of a fraudulent insurance claim, and elder abuse for the conspiracy to conceal the status of a vulnerable adult." The charges hit them like physical blows. Forgery, fraud, abuse. These were not white-collar misunderstandings. These were felonies. These were prison time. These were the end of the life they knew. Amber let out a little gasp, her hand flying to her mouth, but her eyes were darting around, looking for an exit, looking for an excuse, looking for someone to blame. Reynolds pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt, the metal glinting in the church light. "Stand up." "Darius, turn around and put your hands behind your back." That was the moment the dam broke. That was the moment the thin veneer of their marriage dissolved completely. Darius looked at the handcuffs. Then he looked at Amber, and his face twisted into a mask of pure betrayal and panic. He pointed a shaking finger at his wife, his voice rising to a shriek that echoed off the stone walls. "It was her," he screamed, scrambling to his feet, trying to hide behind the detective, trying to put distance between himself and his guilt. "She made me do it, officer. She is the one who wanted the money. She is the one who found the doctor. She planned it all. I didn't want to do it. I told her it was wrong. She said we had to. She said Vinny was going to kill me." Amber's head snapped toward him, her eyes widening in disbelief and then narrowing into hatred. She lunged at him, her fingernails hooked like talons, ready to tear the eyes out of the man she had promised to love and cherish. "You coward," she yelled, her voice shredding the air. "You pathetic, spineless worm. You are blaming me. You signed the papers, Darius. You are the son. You are the one who walked into that office and forged her signature. I just made the calls. You are the one who owes the money. You are the gambling junkie who put us in this hole. Don't you dare put this on me." Officers stepped in, grabbing Amber by the arms, holding her back as she tried to scratch Darius's face off. She struggled, kicking and screaming, her elegant black dress twisting around her legs, losing her shoes, fighting like a wildcat caught in a snare. "He is lying," she shrieked, spitting at him. "He is lying to save his own skin. He begged me to help him. He said his mother was a burden. He said he wished she would just die so he could pay his debts. He said it every night. Officer, arrest him. He is the monster. I am just the wife trying to save her husband." It was ugly, it was raw, and it was the truth finally coming out. They were tearing each other apart, eating their own kind, just like I knew they would. There is no honor among thieves, and there is certainly no loyalty among people who would sell their own mother for a tummy tuck and a cleared gambling ledger. Darius was sobbing again, hold his hands out to the detective. "Please. You have to believe me. I was scared. She threatened to leave me. She threatened to take everything. I was under duress. She is the mastermind. Look at her. Look at how much she spent. Look at her credit cards." Reynolds ignored him, spinning him around and slamming the cuffs onto his wrists. Click, click. The sound was final, the sound of a door locking for a long time. Darius slumped his shoulders, defeated, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow shell of a man. Reynolds pushed him toward the other officer. "Take him out." Then they turned to Amber. She stopped fighting the moment she saw the cuffs coming for her. She straightened up, trying to regain some shred of dignity, trying to fix her hair, trying to act like the victim. She pulled her arms away from the officer. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "I can walk. I am not a criminal. I am a victim of coercion. My lawyer will have me out in an hour, and I will sue this department for everything you have." Reynolds laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Lady, your lawyer is going to need a lot more than an hour. We have the doctor in custody, we have the forger in custody, and we have your mother-in-law standing right there, watching you bury an empty jar. You aren't going anywhere but the county jail. Turn around." He cuffed her, his movements rougher than with Darius, maybe because he didn't like her attitude, maybe because he had a mother too. She gasped as the metal bit into her wrists, her face crumpling, the arrogance finally breaking under the weight of the steel. She looked at me, then she looked at Mom, her eyes pleading, her eyes begging for the mercy she had never shown. Hattie, please tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I took care of you. Tell them we are family. Mom looked at her, leaning on my arm. She didn't say a word. She just reached into her pocket and pulled out the pearl necklace, letting it dangle from her fingers, letting the light catch the luster of the gems. She held it up, a silent reminder of the theft, a silent reminder of the violation. She shook her head slowly. Take them away, Mom said, her voice soft but carrying in the silence. Take them out of my sight. The officers grabbed them by the elbows and began the march down the center aisle. It was the walk of shame to end all walks of shame. Darius was weeping loudly, his head hanging low, his feet dragging through the cat litter he had spilled, leaving gray tracks on the floor. Amber was walking stiffly, her head held high in a mockery of pride, but tears were streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup, turning her into a tragic clown. The congregation, what was left of them, watched in stunned silence. They had come for a funeral, and they had gotten a crime drama. They watched the son and the daughter-in-law being dragged out in irons, passing the empty pews, passing the flowers, passing the open doors where the police cruisers were waiting, lights flashing, illuminating the scene with a chaotic disco pulse. I watched them go, feeling a heavy stone lift from my chest. It was done. The poison was being drawn out. The wound could finally start to heal. But as they reached the doors, Darius turned his head, looking back one last time, looking at me, looking at Mom, looking at the life he had thrown away. Why, he screamed, his voice tearing with anguish. Why didn't you just help me, Otis? Why did you have to do this? You have money. You could have just paid it off. Why did you have to destroy me? I looked at him across the length of the church, across the distance of our lives, and I felt a flicker of pity. Just a flicker quickly extinguished by the memory of Mom in that nursing home, by the memory of the fake death certificate. Because you didn't ask, Darius, I said, my voice low, knowing he couldn't hear me, but saying it for myself. You didn't ask for help. You tried to take it. You tried to steal it. You tried to kill for it, and that is why you lost. The doors swung shut behind them, cutting off his screams, cutting off the sight of the flashing lights, cutting off the connection. Silence rushed back into the church, a heavy, holy silence that felt like a cleansing breath. Mom let out a long sigh, her body sagging against me, the adrenaline finally gone, leaving her a 95-year-old woman who had just lived through the hardest day of her life. I wrapped my arm around her, holding her up, letting her lean on my strength. Is it over? She whispered. It is over, Mama. I said, it is all over. She looked at the mess on the floor, at the spilled litter, at the toppled urn, at the microphone lying there like a discarded toy. She looked at the altar where she had been eulogized by a liar. She shook her head. My poor baby, she said. And I knew she wasn't talking about Darius. She was talking about the little boy. He used to be the innocent child who had been lost somewhere along the way, consumed by the man who had just been dragged out in handcuffs. Come on, Mama, I said gently, turning her away from the altar, away from the scene of the crime. Let's go home. I will make you some tea. We will sit in the garden. She nodded, gripping my hand tight. She didn't look back as we walked down the aisle, following the path the police had cleared, walking out of the darkness and into the light. Outside, the air was hot and sticky, but it felt fresh, it felt clean. The police cars were pulling away, sirens wailing, fading into the distance, taking the trash with them, taking the lies with them. I helped Mom into the truck, lifting her carefully, settling her into the seat. She looked small. She looked tired. But her eyes were clear. Her spirit was unbroken. She reached up and adjusted her hat, straightening the veil, smoothing the lavender silk. Otis, she said, looking at me as I climbed into the driver's seat. Yes, Mama. That went well, she said, a small mischievous smile touching her lips, didn't it? I laughed, a genuine belly laugh that released the last of the tension. It certainly did, Mama, I said, starting the engine. It certainly did. We drove away, leaving the church behind, leaving the scandal behind, heading back to the house that was still ours, heading back to a life that was finally safe, finally free. From the wolves, we had survived the funeral, and now we had the rest of our lives to live. The coffee in the observation room tasted like burnt rubber and day-old regrets. But I drank it anyway because it was the only thing keeping my hands something to do while I watched the final disintegration of my family. The room was small and dark, smelling of floor wax and stale sweat, illuminated only by the harsh fluorescent light bleeding through the one-way glass. Jamal sat next to me, his expensive suit looking out of place in the cramped quarters. He had a file open on his lap, a pen poised over a stack of documents that would ensure Darius and Amber never drew a free breath again, even after they got out of prison. On the other side of the glass, sitting at a metal table bolted to the floor, was Amber. She looked nothing like the queen of the estate sale. She looked like a wet cat shivering in her interrogation room jumpsuit. Her makeup was gone, revealing the hard lines of a woman who had lived on bitterness and envy for too long. Detective Reynolds sat across from her calm patient, a fisherman who had already hooked the catch and was just letting it tire itself out. I watched as Reynolds placed a photo on the table. It was a picture of the fake urn lying in the kitty litter. Amber flinched as if he had slapped her. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly back and forth. "It wasn't my idea," she whispered, her voice tinny through the speaker system. "It was Darius. He is the one who owes the money. He is the one who is desperate, officer. You have to believe me. I just wanted to help my husband. I didn't know he was going to go this far." Reynolds didn't say anything. He just let the silence stretch, let it pull at her nerves until they snapped. "He is a gambling addict." Amber blurted out the words, rushing out like water from a broken dam. "He has been betting on sports for 20 years. He owes everyone. He owes the banks. He owes the sharks. He owes people you don't want to owe. That is why we needed the insurance money. Vinny the Roach was going to kill him, officer." He told Darius if he didn't have the cash by Tuesday, he was going to start cutting off fingers. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, watching her throw her husband to the wolves without a second of hesitation. She wasn't trying to save him. She was trying to paint herself as the victim of a dangerous man. She was rewriting the narrative again, just like she did at the funeral. "And the pension?" Reynolds asked, tapping a file folder on the table. We looked into Hattie King's finances. We noticed some irregularities going back a decade long before the nursing home. Amber's eyes widened. She saw a lifeline. She saw a way to bury Darius even deeper, to distance herself from the long-term theft. "That was him too," she exclaimed, leaning forward, eager to sell him out, eager to trade his life for her freedom. "He has been stealing her pension checks for 10 years, officer. He had power of attorney, or he forged it. I don't know, but he would intercept the mail. He would cash the checks. He told me his mother gave it to him. He told me she wanted him to have it, but I saw him practicing her signature late at night. I saw him transferring the money to offshore betting accounts. He stole hundreds of thousands of dollars, officer. He bled her dry. That is why the house was falling apart. That is why she didn't have nice things. He took it all every single month for 10 years. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. 10 years I knew about the recent theft. I knew about the nursing home scheme, but 10 years meant Darius had been stealing from Mom while Dad was still alive, or right after he passed. It meant he had been robbing the woman who fed him while sitting at her table eating her food while smiling in her face. It was a betrayal so profound, so systemic, that it made the fake funeral look like a minor infraction. Jamal looked at me, his face grim. "We can add grand larceny and elder financial exploitation to the list, Otis. This goes back way further than we thought." "Add it," I said, my voice flat. "Add every dime, Jamal, every single cent." Reynolds stood up, leaving Amber alone in the room. She put her head on the table and began to weep, the sound distorted and ugly. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a cold resolve to finish this. Reynolds walked out, and a few minutes later, 2 uniformed officers brought Darius in. They sat him down in the same chair Amber had just vacated, the seat still warm from his wife's betrayal. Darius looked worse than her. His eyes were hollow. His hands were shaking so bad he couldn't keep them still on the table. He looked at the mirror. He looked right at me. Though he couldn't see me, and for a second I saw the little brother I used to teach how to throw a baseball. But that boy was dead, killed by the junkie sitting in the chair. Reynolds walked back in carrying a new file, looking fresh, looking ready for round 2. "Your wife has a lot to say," Darius Reynolds said, sitting down and opening the folder. "She says you are a gambling addict, she says. You stole your mother's pension for 10 years. She says this whole funeral scam was your idea to pay off a shark named Vinny." Darius flinched, his head snapping up. "She said that." "She said you forged the signatures," Reynolds continued. "She said she was just a supportive wife who got dragged into your mess. She is cutting a deal, Darius. She is giving us everything. She is painting you as the monster and herself as the saint." Darius's face twisted. It went from fear to a rage that was ugly to behold. His jaw worked. His fists clenched on the metal table. That lying witch, he hissed, that lying plastic gold-digging witch. She said that she is the one who spent the money, officer. She is the one who needed the lifestyle. She is the one who wanted the cars and the clothes. I gambled. Yes, I gambled to try and make enough money to keep her happy because nothing was ever enough for her. He leaned forward, spitting the words out, desperate to drag her down with him, desperate to make sure she didn't walk away clean while he took the fall. "You want to know about stealing?" Darius shouted, his voice cracking. "Ask her about the jewelry. Ask her about Mom's diamond brooch, the one from the 1950s. Ask her about the ruby ring. Ask her about the silver service set. She didn't just wear the pearls, officer. She cleaned out the jewelry box 3 years ago when we put Mom in the home. She took everything, every piece of gold, every gemstone, and she pawned it. She pawned it all at a shop on Decatur Street called Easy Cash. Ask her what she did with the money. She got a nose job, officer. She got Botox. She put my mother's heirlooms into her face." I closed my eyes, the coffee cup warm in my hand, but my blood running ice cold. The brooch Dad had given Mom, that brooch when I was born, it was her most prized possession. She kept it wrapped in silk in a cedar box. She had promised it to her granddaughter, if she ever had one. Amber had sold it for vanity. She had melted down my family history to inject poison into her face. She had literally consumed my mother's legacy to feed her own ego. Reynolds was writing it all down, nodding, encouraging the flow of hate. "Tell me more. Darius, tell me about the nursing home. Tell me about the plan." "It was her idea," Darius sobbed. The fight draining out of him, replaced by a pathetic whining. "It was all her idea," she said. "Mom was a vegetable. She said nobody would care. She said the money was just sitting there, waiting to be taken. She found the doctor. She found the forger. She set up the estate sale. She threw the photos in the dumpster. I just wanted to pay Vinny. I just wanted to survive. But she wanted to erase Mom. She hated her, officer. She hated her because Mom saw through her. Mom knew what she was. She called her a snake once, and Amber never forgave her." I opened my eyes, looking at the man who shared my blood, the man who had just confessed to being a puppet, a thief, and a coward. He was crying again, head on the table, broken and alone. He had sold his soul for a woman who had sold him out in 5 minutes. Jamal slid a stack of papers across the small table in the observation room. The sound of the paper sliding was loud in the quiet room. "These are the civil suits," Otis Jamal said, his voice low, professional, devoid of the emotion that was choking me. "We are suing for the recovery of the pension funds, the value of the stolen jewelry, the emotional distress, the fraud we are placing. Liens on everything they might still have hidden. We are freezing Amber's offshore account, the one she thought was secret. We are going after future earnings if they ever have any. We are going to ensure that when they get out of prison in 10 or 15 years, they will be destitute. They will owe you for the rest of their lives." I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive pen, a pen that felt like authority. I looked through the glass one last time at Darius. He was rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the belt. But this wasn't a broken window. This was a broken life. I thought about Mom, sitting at home in her garden, drinking tea surrounded by the flowers she loved. I thought about the brooch she would never see again. I thought about the 10 years of theft she hadn't known about, the betrayal that had been happening right under her nose. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel joy. Revenge isn't sweet. It is bitter, and it is hard work, but it is necessary, like cutting out a gangrenous limb to save the body. I had to do this. I had to finish it, not just for me, but for Hattie, for Dad, for the family name. They had tried to drag through the mud. I signed the papers, Otis King, Otis King, Otis King, 3 times, 3 strikes, 3 nails in the coffin of my brother's life. I capped the pen and handed the file back to Jamal. "File them." I said, "File them today. I want them served in their cells. I want them to know that while they are fighting the state for their freedom, they are fighting me for their survival." Jamal nodded, putting the file into his briefcase. "You are a hard man, Otis. I am a just man." "Jamal," I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket, "and sometimes justice requires a hard hand." I walked to the door, taking one last look at Darius through the glass. He didn't look up. He didn't know I was there watching him drown. He was alone with his choices, and that was the worst punishment of all. "Let's go, Jamal," I said, opening the door. The air in the hallway was cooler, cleaner. "I need to go buy my mother a new brooch. I know it won't be the same, but but I think she deserves something beautiful after all of this. We walked out of the station, leaving the police to do their work, leaving Darius and Amber to their cages. I walked out into the afternoon sun, feeling the weight of the day settle onto my shoulders. But I stood tall, I was Otis King, and I had protected what was mine. The war was over, the cleanup had begun, and I still had a mother waiting for me at home. The office of Jamal Washington smelled of leather bindings and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the jail cell smell that still clung to my brother Darius. Sat in the wingback chair across from me, shifting uncomfortably, his wrists probably still raw from the handcuffs. He looked thinner, his skin sallow and gray like old newspaper, but his eyes still held that flicker of defiance, that spark of unearned arrogance that had been his downfall his entire life. He was out on bail, a temporary freedom that I had paid for, not because I loved him, but because I needed him here in this room for the final act of the play. I needed him to understand exactly how much he had lost, and I needed him to hear it from me, not a court-appointed lawyer. Jamal sat behind his massive mahogany desk, fingers steeped, looking at Darius with the dispassionate interest of a scientist observing a particularly stupid lab rat. The air conditioner hummed a low, steady drone that underlined the silence. Darius cleared his throat, a dry, raspy sound. He pulled at the collar of his shirt, trying to regain some of the swagger he had lost in the holding cell, trying to be the big man again, even though we all knew he was just a bug waiting to be squashed. "You think you are smart, Otis," Darius said, his voice scratching against the silence. "You think because you got Mom to do that little performance at the church that you have won everything well. You are wrong. Mom is alive. Fine. I admit that was a shock, but that doesn't change the law. Dad died without a will 20 years ago. That means the house, the family house, belongs to the estate. It belongs to the heirs. And last time I checked, I am still a son. I still have rights." He leaned forward, a desperate gleam in his eye, thinking he had found a loophole, thinking he could still salvage a payday from the wreckage of his crimes. That house is community property. Otis half belongs to Mom, sure, but the other half, the half Dad owned, that gets split between the children. You can't kick me out of my own inheritance. I have a right to live there. I have a right to my share of the equity. You can't sell it without my signature, and I am not signing anything unless I get my cut. I listened to him ramble, listened to him cite laws he didn't understand, listened to him try to claim ownership of a roof he hadn't fixed in 30 years, a floor he hadn't swept, a yard he hadn't mowed. He was talking about rights, but he didn't know the first thing about responsibility. He thought blood was a deed. He thought DNA was a currency. I looked at Jamal and nodded, giving him the signal to drop the hammer. Jamal opened a thick file folder on his desk. The sound of the heavy paper turning was loud in the quiet room. He pulled out a document, a deed with a gold seal, and slid it across the polished wood until it rested right in front of Darius. "Read it, Darius," Jamal said, his voice smooth and cold. Darius looked at the paper, squinting his eyes, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. He read the top line, then the second, his brow furrowing in confusion. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "This says the owner is King Enterprises, LLC. What is King Enterprises?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs, taking a moment to enjoy the look on his face. "King Enterprises is a limited liability company. Darius," I said, my voice calm, steady, the voice of the man who had been running things while he was running away. "I formed it 20 years ago, right after Dad died. I saw how you were even back then. I saw the way you looked at the house, not as a home, but as an asset. I saw the gambling, I saw the debts. I knew it was only a matter of time before you tried to leverage the house to pay for your mistakes." Darius looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. "But Dad built it," he stammered. "It was his. And Dad knew you were a hustler." I cut him off. "Dad knew you would sell the bricks out from under your mother if you got the chance, so before he passed, he sold the house to me, Darius. He sold it to the company for $1 and other valuable consideration. We did the paperwork legal and tight. Mom isn't the owner, Darius. She never was. She is a tenant. She has a lifetime lease that guarantees her the right to live there, rent-free until the day she dies. But the ownership, the title, the equity, it all belongs to King Enterprises." "And who owns King Enterprises?" Darius asked, his voice barely a whisper, though he already knew the answer. He could feel the walls closing in. He could feel the floor dropping out. I pointed a finger at my chest. "I do. I said I am the sole managing member. I own the house. I own the land. I own the dirt. under your fingernails. You don't have a share. Darius, you don't have a claim. You don't have a single legal right to that property. You are not an heir to the house. You are a trespasser. Darius slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him like water from a cracked bucket. He looked small, he looked defeated. But he wasn't done yet. The greed was a disease in his blood, and it wouldn't let him die with dignity. Fine, he spat, his face twisting into a sneer. Keep the house. It is just a pile of old wood anyway. But you can't touch me, Otis. I will file for bankruptcy. I will wipe out the debts, the loans, Vinny, the banks. They can't get blood from a stone. I will walk away clean, and I will start over. You can't stop me. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that seemed to startle him. Bankruptcy? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You think that is your escape hatch? You think you can just wash away your sins with a court filing? Jamal slid another stack of papers across the desk. This stack was thicker, bound with a heavy rubber band. Take a look at those, Darius, Jamal said. Darius picked up the top paper, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. He read the header and his eyes went wide. It was a promissory note, a loan agreement from First National Bank, the one securing his massive credit card debt and his personal loans. But at the bottom there was a new stamp, a red ink stamp that said, assigned to holder in due course. I bought your debt, Darius, I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble. I went to the bank the day of the funeral, the day of the show, and I bought every single note you had. I paid them off in full principal and interest. The bank was happy to get the bad debt off their books. They sold it to me for a discount. But you, Darius, you owe the full amount. He flipped through the papers faster now, panic setting in. He saw the car note. He saw the credit cards. He saw the personal loans, and then he reached the bottom of the stack, the street debt, the marker he had signed with Vinny, the roach, the one written on a napkin with a thumbprint in ink. You bought Vinny out, he whispered, looking at me with pure horror. Vinny doesn't sell debt, he collects. Vinny is a businessman, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. He likes cash, Darius. He likes cash today more than he likes chasing a deadbeat who is about to go to prison. I paid him 50 cents on the dollar. He walked away happy, and he gave me the paper. I own you, Darius, I said, letting the words hang in the air, heavy and absolute. I am your creditor. I am your landlord. I am the man holding the leash you owe me, $212,000 plus interest. And unlike the bank, unlike Vinny, I am not going to write it off. I am not going to negotiate. I am going to collect. But how Darius cried, tears of frustration springing to his eyes. How can you do this? I am your brother. You stopped being my brother when you buried an empty jar and called it our mother. I said, my voice hard as granite. You stopped being my brother when you stole her pension. You stopped being my brother when you decided her life was worth less than your gambling habit. Now I am just the man you owe money to. I stood up, walking over to the window, looking out at the city skyline, looking at the world that kept turning. While my brother's life stopped, Jamal handed me a document, a single sheet of paper with a place for a signature. This is a confession of judgment, Jamal said to Darius. It says you acknowledge the debt. It says you waive your right to a trial. It says you agree to the immediate seizure of any and all assets to satisfy the judgment. If you sign this, Otis might be willing to ask the district attorney for leniency on the sentencing recommendation for the fraud charges. If you don't sign it, we will pursue the civil case alongside the criminal case, and we will make sure you spend every day of your sentence worrying about what happens when you get out. Because this debt, Darius, this kind of debt, it doesn't go away in bankruptcy. It follows you. It waits for you. Darius looked at the paper, looked at me, looked at Jamal. He was trapped. He was a rat in a maze with no cheese and only electric shocks waiting at every turn. He picked up the pen, his hand heavy as lead. He didn't read the text. He didn't argue. He just signed his name, scratching the signature across the line, signing away his future, signing away his freedom, signing away the last shred of his pride. Jamal took the paper, checking the signature, nodding satisfaction. Good choice, he said. I turned back from the window, looking at the man who used to share a bunk bed with me. Get out, I said. Darius stood up, his legs wobbly. He looked like he had aged 20 years. In 20 minutes. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, his voice broken. I can't go home. Amber locked me out. The police seized the car. I have nothing. I don't care. I said, cold and final. Go to a shelter. Go to the street. Go to hell for all I care. Just get out of my sight. He walked to the door. His shoulders slumped. A broken man, walking into a broken future. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, looking back at me one last time, hoping for something, hoping for a miracle, hoping for the brother he had betrayed to save him one more time. Otis, he whispered, why? Because you tried to kill the queen, I said. And when you come for the queen, you better make sure you don't miss, because the king doesn't forgive. He opened the door and walked out into the hallway, leaving the smell of fear and failure behind him. I listened to his footsteps fading away, listened to the sound of my victory. It didn't taste sweet, it tasted like ash, but it was necessary, it was done. The house was safe, Mom was safe, and Darius was gone, erased from the ledger, balanced out like a bad check. I looked at Jamal. He closed the file with a snap. That is it, then? Jamal asked. That is it, I said, straightening my tie. That is the end of Darius King. Now let's go get some lunch. I am starving, and I know a place that serves real food, not that fancy stuff they serve to sharks. We walked out of the office, leaving the files on the desk, leaving the legal wreckage of my brother's life behind. I stepped out into the sun, and for the first time in a long time, the air felt fresh. The burden was gone. I was Otis King, and I had cleaned house. The rain had started falling an hour after I left Jamal's office, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the Atlanta dust into red mud. I was sitting on my front porch in a rocking chair, watching the water drip from the eaves, the rhythm soothing my nerves. Mom was inside asleep finally, at peace, knowing the house was safe and the wolves had been chased away. But I knew there was one wolf left, one desperate stray who hadn't been caged yet, and I knew she would come to me because predators always return to the scene of the hunt, hoping for scraps. I saw the headlights cut through the rain around 9 o'clock. A taxi slowed down at the end of the driveway, hesitating before splashing through the puddles and pulling up to the house. The door opened and Amber stepped out. She wasn't wearing the black dress from the funeral anymore. She was wearing a raincoat belted tight at the waist and heels that sank into the wet gravel. She sent the taxi away, a bold move for a woman with no car and no home. She walked up the steps to the porch, her hair plastered to her skull, looking like a drowned rat, but even a drowned rat has teeth. I didn't get up. I just rocked slowly back and forth, letting the chair creak against the wood. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at me, shivering. She had washed her face. The makeup was gone, and she looked younger but also harder. The desperation had stripped away the mask of the socialite, leaving the grifter underneath exposed. Otis, she said, her voice trembling over the sound of the rain. Can I come in? It is freezing out here. The porch is fine. Amber, I said, my voice flat. State your business. She walked up the steps, invading my space, bringing the smell of rain and cheap perfume with her. She stood right in front of me, blocking my view of the yard. She unbelted the raincoat, letting it fall open just enough to show she was wearing a dress that was too short and too tight for a woman in her position. She was trying to play a card she didn't have. She was trying to use the only currency she thought she had left, her body. Otis, please, she whispered, dropping to her knees beside my chair, placing a hand on my arm. Her fingers were cold, clammy. I need your help. I have nowhere to go. Darius ruined everything. He destroyed our lives. I looked at her hand on my arm with the same detachment I would look at a leech. I didn't shake her off. I just watched her perform. She was good. I had to give her that. The tears welled up in her eyes on command, spilling over perfectly. It wasn't me, Otis. She sobbed, leaning her head against my knee, trying to create an intimacy that never existed. I was a victim. He manipulated me. He controlled me. He is a monster, Otis. You don't know what it was like living with him. The gambling, the threats, the anger. He forced me to make those calls. He forced me to find the doctor. He said if I didn't help him get the money, he would kill me. I was terrified, Otis. I just wanted to survive. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading, trying to sell me the narrative of the battered wife trying to rewrite history again, just like she did in the church. She squeezed my arm, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. You are a good man, Otis. I always knew you were the good one, the strong one. Darius is weak. He is nothing compared to you. You saved Hattie. You saved the house. You are a hero. I should have married a man like you, someone who can protect a woman, someone with resources. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. She was hitting on her brother-in-law. She was trying to seduce the man whose mother she had tried to bury hours ago. It was depraved. It was the lowest form of survival instinct I had ever seen, she thought. Because I was an old man living alone, that I was lonely. She thought I was desperate for female attention. She thought she could trade a little affection for a roof over her head and access to my bank account. I stopped rocking the chair, stood still. I looked down at her, at the fake tears, at the calculated pose. "You are a victim, Amber?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Yes," she breathed, nodding eagerly. "Yes, I am a victim of his greed." "And you had nothing to do with it. You were just a scared girl doing what she was told." "Exactly," she said, hope flaring in her eyes. "Exactly." "Otis, you understand. You see the truth. Please let me stay here just for a night. I can cook for you. I can clean. I can take care of Hattie. I can be good to you." "Otis, really good." I stood up, breaking her contact, pulling away from her touch. She almost fell forward. Losing her balance, she scrambled to her feet, clutching the raincoat around her, waiting for my verdict. "I think there is someone who would disagree with that story." "Amber," I said, walking over to the front door. "I think there is someone who knows exactly what kind of victim you are." I opened the door. Amber looked confused, looking past me into the dark hallway, expecting to see Hattie, expecting to see the police, but the woman who stepped out onto the porch was neither. It was Vanessa, Darius's first wife, the woman he had been married to for 20 years before Amber came along, the woman who had raised his children before Amber chased them away, the woman whose life Amber had systematically destroyed with lies and rumors and seduction. Vanessa was 55 now, gray at the temples, wearing a sensible cardigan and jeans. She didn't look like a model. She looked like a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. Amber gasped, stepping back until her heels hit the railing. "Vanessa," she whispered, her face draining of blood. "What are you doing here?" "I invited her," I said, standing next to Vanessa, united in our knowledge of the truth. "I thought she should hear your version of events. I thought she should hear how you are the victim." Vanessa looked at Amber with a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She just spoke with the quiet authority of the righteous. "Hello, Amber." Vanessa said, her voice steady. "I heard you were looking for a place to stay. I heard Darius is in jail, and you are all alone." Amber tried to rally, tried to find a defense, but Vanessa was her kryptonite. Vanessa knew where all the bodies were buried because she had watched Amber dig the graves. "He made me do it, Vanessa," Amber stammered, falling back on the lie. "Darius is crazy. Darius is a fool." Vanessa cut her off. "Darius is a weak man who thinks with the wrong head, but he was a good father before he met you. He was a decent husband before you started whispering in his ear at that casino where you were working as a cocktail waitress. You targeted him, Amber. You saw a man with a steady job and a pension, and you decided he was your ticket out of the trailer park. You wrecked my marriage. You turned his children against him. You spent his retirement on clothes and surgery, and now you are trying to tell his brother that you are the victim." I watched Amber crumble the seductress act, vanished, replaced by the cornered rat. She looked from Vanessa to me, looking for a crack, looking for a weakness. She found none. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know. You knew everything I said." Stepping forward, I pulled a tablet from the pocket of my jacket, the screen glowing blue in the darkness. "I wasn't just investigating Darius, Amber. I was investigating you too, because a snake doesn't change its stripes just because it changes gardens." I tapped the screen, bringing up a video file. It was grainy black and white footage from a security camera timestamped 2 weeks ago. The location was a high-end jewelry store in Buckhead. The camera angle was high, looking down at the counter. "Look closely, Amber," I said, holding the screen up to her face. On the video, Amber was standing at the counter trying on a diamond tennis bracelet. The clerk turned away for a second to answer the phone, and Amber moved with the speed of a magician. She slipped the bracelet off her wrist and into the sleeve of her coat in one fluid motion. Then she picked up her purse and walked out calmly, casually, a professional thief. "That bracelet was worth $12,000, I said. Putting the tablet away, "The store didn't catch you then. But my investigator found the footage when he was looking into your pawn shop transactions. You see, Amber, you didn't just pawn Mom's jewelry, you pawned stolen goods too. That is a felony, grand larceny." Amber was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. She looked at the darkness beyond the porch railing, as if considering jumping, as if considering running into the woods. "Please," she whimpered, sinking to the floor again, but this time it wasn't an act. This time it was pure terror. "Please don't give that to the police. I can't go to jail. I will die in there. Otis, please, I will do anything." I looked at Vanessa. She nodded once, satisfied that justice was being served. She had seen the woman who destroyed her life reduced to a begging heap on a porch in the rain. I reached into my pocket again, but this time I didn't pull out evidence. I pulled out a piece of paper, a long rectangular slip printed on flimsy stock. "Stand up, Amber," I commanded. She stood up, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, looking at me with a glimmer of hope, thinking I was going to offer her a deal, thinking she had won a reprieve. "This is a bus ticket," I said, holding it out to her. "It is for the Greyhound, leaving the downtown station in 45 minutes. It is a one-way ticket to Tallahassee, Florida. I have an associate there who runs a diner. He needs a dishwasher. It pays minimum wage. It is hard work, but it is honest work. Tallahassee." She stared at the ticket as if it were a death sentence. "Wash dishes, Otis. Are you serious? Dead serious?" I said, "You have two choices. Amber, you can take this ticket. You can get in that taxi. I have waiting at the end of the driveway, and you can leave Atlanta tonight. You never come back. You never contact Darius. You never contact us. If you do, the video goes to the police, or you can stay here and I will call Detective Reynolds right now and add grand larceny to your list of charges." She looked at the ticket. She looked at the phone in my other hand. She looked at the warm light spilling out from the house, the home she had wanted to steal, the life she had wanted to hijack. She realized finally that she had lost. The game was over, and she had no chips left. She snatched the ticket from my hand, her fingernails scraping my palm. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, the mask gone forever. "I hope you rot in hell, Otis," she hissed. "I hope you and that old witch die in this house." I smiled, a cold, hard smile that matched the night get moving Amber. "You don't want to miss your bus." She turned and ran down the steps, almost tripping in her haste. She ran through the rain, splashing through the puddles, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement. She ran toward the end of the driveway where the taxi was waiting, its headlights cutting through the gloom. She didn't look back. She just ran, fleeing the wreckage of her own ambition. I watched the taillights of the taxi fade into the distance, disappearing into the night. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Vanessa. She was watching them go too, a look of closure on her face. "Thank you, Otis," she said quietly. "Thank you for letting me see that." "You deserved it, Vanessa," I said. "You deserved to see the trash taken out." We stood there for a moment, listening to the rain, listening to the silence of the night. The air felt cleaner, now washed, scrubbed of the scent of cheap perfume and lies. "Come on in, Vanessa," I said, opening the door. "Mom is awake. She would love to see you. She always liked you best." Vanessa smiled, a genuine smile that took 10 years off her face. "I would like that, Otis. I would like that very much." We walked inside, closing the door on the storm, closing the door on Amber, leaving her to her long ride to nowhere, leaving her to a future of dishwater and regret. I locked the deadbolt. The sound was solid, secure. The house was safe, the family was safe, and the last wolf was gone. The rain that had washed Amber away did not stop. It simply changed its rhythm, turning from a cleansing shower into a cold, relentless downpour that hammered against the roof like 1,000 tiny fists wanting to get in. 3 days had passed since I bought my brother's debt, since I watched his wife flee into the night. 3 days of silence from the man who used to share my blood. But I knew the silence would not last. I knew that when a man is stripped of everything, when the false armor of money and status is peeled away, he instinctively tries to return to the womb, to the place where he felt safe before the world broke him. Darius didn't come back as a conqueror, this time. He didn't come back with a lawyer or a moving truck. He came back as a ghost. I watched him on the security monitors first, a dark shape stumbling up the driveway, his silhouette jagged and broken against the streetlights. He wasn't driving his luxury sedan that had been repossessed the morning after his release from jail, snatched by a tow truck driver who didn't care about Darius's screaming or his threats of lawsuits. He was on foot, walking in shoes that were made for boardrooms, not for miles of wet asphalt. His suit, the expensive gray one he had worn to the bond hearing, was ruined dark with water and mud clinging to his frame like a shroud. He reached the front porch, the sanctuary he had tried to sell, the home he had tried to erase, and he reached into his pocket, fumbling for a key that no longer existed. He didn't know that the day I took Mom back, I had called a locksmith, not just any locksmith, but a security specialist who installed deadbolts that could stop a battering ram and electronic keypads that required a code. Darius would never guess he jammed his old key into the lock, scratching the brass, desperate, frantic, turning it with a force that spoke of panic. It didn't turn. It didn't even fit the metal grated against metal, a harsh sound of rejection. Darius rattled the doorknob, shaking the heavy oak door, trying to force his way back into a life he had forfeited. "Open up!" he screamed, his voice cracking his throat, raw from days of yelling at people who didn't care. "Open the damn door!" "Otis, I know you are in there. This is my house too. Let me in." I stood in the hallway listening to him unravel, listening to the sound of his fists pounding against the wood, dull, heavy thuds that vibrated through the floorboards. He wasn't asking for shelter. He was demanding it. He still believed in his delusion. He still believed he was owed something. He threw his shoulder against the door again and again, a futile attempt to break down a fortress I had spent a lifetime fortifying. Mom was in the living room, sitting in her favorite armchair by the window. The curtains were drawn, but she had pulled the edge back just an inch, peering out into the storm. She wasn't wearing her glasses. She didn't need them to see the misery on her front porch. She was wearing her nightgown, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, shivering not from cold, but from the spectral chill of seeing her child reduced to a wild animal. I walked over to her, my steps quiet on the rug, trying not to startle her, trying to offer a presence without an intrusion. "Mama," I said softly, "you don't have to watch this. Go back to bed. I will handle it." She didn't move her hand, clutching the curtain fabric tight, her eyes wet with tears that refused to fall. She watched Darius slip on the wet concrete of the porch, falling to his knees, scraping his hands. He stayed there for a moment, head hanging, the rain plastering his hair to his skull, looking like a penitent, looking like a beggar at the gates of heaven. But this wasn't heaven, and he was no saint. "He is hungry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He looks so thin. Otis, look at him. He is soaked to the bone. He has nowhere to go." I looked at the man outside, the man who had forged her signature, the man who had left her in a nursing home to die, the man who had thrown her memories into a dumpster. He wasn't just a man in the rain, he was a consequence made flesh. "He made his bed, Mama," I said, my voice hard but not cruel. "He has to lie in it now. If we open that door, if we let him in, even for a minute, he will destroy us. He will consume this house. He will consume your peace. He is not Darius anymore. He is a bottomless pit of need and greed." Darius pulled himself up, leaning against the doorframe, sobbing now, a wretched sound that cut through the noise of the rain. "Mom, open up. Please, it is your baby boy. I am sorry, Mama. I am sorry for everything. Just let me dry off. Just give me something to eat. Please don't leave me out here. It is dark, Mama. I am scared." Mom let out a small whimper, a sound of pure maternal agony. She raised her hand as if to touch the glass, as if to touch the face of the sun. She remembered the boy who used to bring her dandelions, not the man who brought her a death certificate. Her fingers traced the outline of his slumped figure through the cold pain. "I want to open it," she said, tears finally spilling over, tracking down the lines of her face. "I want to feed him Otis. I want to wrap him in a blanket and tell him it is going to be okay. That is what a mother does, isn't it? A mother forgives. A mother protects." "Not this time, Mama," I said, kneeling beside her chair, taking her free hand in mine, feeling the coldness of her skin. "Not when the child is a wolf. A mother protects the nest. Mama, she protects the home. If you let him in, he won't see your love. He will see a weakness. He will see a victim. He will steal the silver while you are making him soup. He will take the deed while you are drying his clothes. He doesn't want your forgiveness. Mama, he wants your assets. He wants to survive at your expense." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, looking for the strength she felt she lacked, looking for the resolve that had kept our family standing for 75 years. She looked back at the window at the man screaming at the wood. "You are right," she whispered, closing her eyes, letting the curtain fall back into place, blocking out the sight but not the sound. "You are right, Otis. If he comes in here, he will bring the devil with him. He will bring the lies and the gambling and the hate." She took a deep breath, steadying herself, finding the steel spine that had carried her through widowhood and poverty. She gripped my hand tight, anchoring herself. "Better he suffers out there," she said, her voice breaking but firm. "Better he suffers in the rain and the cold than to let him turn into a devil in this house. Better he learns what rock bottom feels like than to let him drag us down with him. Keep the door locked. Otis, keep it locked tight." I squeezed her hand, understanding the cost of those words, understanding that she was cutting off a piece of her own heart to save the rest of it. "Go to your room, Mama," I said gently. "I will take care of this. I will make sure he goes." She nodded, standing up slowly, leaning on her cane. She walked toward the hallway, her steps heavy, carrying the weight of a decision no mother should have to make. She didn't look back. She just kept walking, retreating into the safety of the house, leaving her son to the storm he had summoned. I walked to the front door, listening to Darius scratching at the wood like a dog, listening to him mutter curses mixed with prayers. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound exhaustion. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 3 digits, 911. "This is Otis King," I said. When the operator answered, my voice calm, devoid of the drama unfolding on my porch. "I have an intruder at my residence, 554 Elm Street. He is attempting to break down the front door. He is aggressive and he is refusing to leave. Yes, I know him. He is a relative, but he is not welcome here and he is trespassing. Please send a patrol car." I hung up and waited, standing sentinel in the hallway, watching the door shudder under Darius's blows, watching the handle jiggle uselessly. 10 minutes later, I saw the blue lights flash through the transom window, creating a strobe effect in the dark hall. I heard the car doors slam, heard the heavy boots of the officers running up the walk. Darius screamed when they grabbed him, a sound of pure terror. No, I live here. This is my house. Ask my brother. He is inside Otis. Tell them I belong here." I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I let the silence be my answer. I let the law do what a brother couldn't. I heard the struggle, the scuffle of feet on the wet wood, the sound of cuffs ratcheting shut. For the second time in a week, I heard the officers reading him. His rights, heard them dragging him down the steps, dragging him away from the inheritance he thought was his birthright. "You can't do this," Darius yelled, his voice fading as they shoved him into the back of the cruiser. "Otis, you are killing me. You are killing your own brother." I walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just an inch, just like Mom had done. I watched the police car pull away, the lights reflecting off the wet pavement, turning the puddles into pools of blood and oil. I watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving the street empty and silent, leaving the rain to wash away the footprints on the porch. I wasn't killing him. I was letting him live the life he had chosen. I was letting him face the reality he had created. I let the curtain fall back, closing out the night, closing out the guilt. I walked through the quiet house, turning off the lights one by one until I reached the bottom of the stairs. I listened for a moment, hearing the soft rhythm of Mom's breathing from her room upstairs. She was safe. The house was safe. The foundation held. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand steady, my conscience clear. I had protected the queen. I had defended the castle, and the intruder was gone tomorrow. The sun would rise tomorrow. The mud would dry tomorrow. We would start again. Just the two of us, survivors in a house built on love and defended by truth. I drank the water, feeling it cool, my throat feeling it wash away the taste of betrayal. I was Otis King, and I was finally alone in a house that was truly mine. 3 months is a long time to sit in a jail cell waiting for the world to decide your fate, but it is barely a blink of an eye when you are 95 years old and living your best life. Hattie King had spent the last 90 days reclaiming her throne. She had replanted her garden. She had hosted tea for the church ladies who had apologized profusely for believing the lie. And she had sat on the front porch every evening watching the sun go down over a kingdom that was finally safe from invaders. I sat next to her in the front row of the Fulton County Superior Court, holding her hand. Her grip was loose, relaxed. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was just there to see it finished. She was there to close the book. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old paper. The air was cool and dry, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, steady drone that sounded like judgment. The gallery was full, not with paid actors this time, but with the people Darius and Amber had wronged, the creditors, the former friends, the neighbors who had bought broken toasters at the estate sale. They were all there to see the final act of the tragedy. Darius and Amber sat at the defense table wearing orange jumpsuits that clashed with their pale skin and dark circles. They looked like ghosts of the people they used to be. Amber's hair was dull and matted, her roots showing gray, her face free of the makeup she used to wear, like armor. Darius looked shrunken, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to disappear into himself. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the jury. He looked at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with a shaking finger, lost in the maze of his own failures. The judge was a woman named Honorable Sarah Jenkins, a no-nonsense jurist with eyes that could spot a lie from a mile away. She shuffled the papers on her bench, the sound loud in the hushed room. She looked at the defendants over the rim of her glasses, and the weight of her gaze made Amber whimper. Darius King and Amber King. She said, her voice clear and resonant. You have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on multiple counts of wire fraud, forgery of federal documents, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The evidence against you was overwhelming. The testimony was heartbreaking, and your lack of remorse throughout this process has been noted by this court. She paused, letting the words sink in, letting the reality of their situation settle on their shoulders like a lead blanket. You viewed a living, breathing human being not as a mother or a mother-in-law, but as an obstacle to your greed. You falsified her death, you desecrated her memory, and you attempted to rob her of the dignity she earned over 95 years of life. This court finds your actions not only criminal, but morally repugnant. Amber started to cry, soft, hitching sobs that garnered no sympathy from the room. She looked at the judge, pleading with her eyes, but Judge Jenkins was made of stone. It is the judgment of this court, she continued, that you be sentenced to 10 years in a federal correctional facility for the fraud charges to run concurrently with 5 years for the elder abuse charges. You will also be required to pay restitution to the victims, including the insurance company. And Mrs. Hattie King, you will be eligible for parole in 8 years, but given the nature of your crimes, I would not count on it. 10 years. The gavel banged a sharp final sound that echoed like a gunshot, ending the life Darius and Amber had known. 10 years of steel bars and concrete floors. 10 years of thinking about the freedom they had traded for a lie. Amber put her head on the table and wailed, a raw, ugly sound of despair. Her lawyer patted her shoulder awkwardly, looking at his watch, ready to move on to his next case. Darius didn't move. He didn't cry. He just sat there frozen. His mind unable to process the number 10 years meant he would be nearly 80 when he got out. He would be an old man with nothing, no home, no wife, no money, no family. The bailiffs moved in, pulling them up from their chairs. The sound of the chains rattling was a harsh music accompanying their exit. Amber was practically carried out. Her legs, useless. Her spirit broken. But Darius stopped. He planted his feet, resisting the pull of the officer. He turned his head slowly, looking back at the gallery, looking for me. He found me sitting there in my charcoal suit, calm and steady, holding Mom's hand. Our eyes met across the courtroom, across the wreckage of our brotherhood, and in his eyes, I saw something ignite, a spark of pure, unadulterated hatred mixed with a confusion so deep it looked like madness. Wait, he rasped, his voice dry and cracked. Wait, I want to talk to him. The bailiff looked at the judge. She nodded once, granting the condemned man a final word. Darius shook off the officer's hand and took a step toward the rail separating us. He gripped the wood, his knuckles white, his eyes burning into mine. Why, Otis? He screamed, his voice tearing at his throat. Why did you have to do this? You are rich. I know you are rich now. Jamal told me everything. You own the company. You own the debt. You own half the city. Why couldn't you just give me some? Why are you so selfish? The accusation hung in the air, heavy and toxic. He still didn't get it, even at the end, even facing prison. He still thought this was about money. He still thought he was the victim of my greed. He thought I had hoarded my wealth to punish him. I stood up slowly, buttoning my jacket. I walked to the rail, meeting him face to face, separated only by a thin piece of wood and a lifetime of choices. I looked at him and I felt a profound sadness, not for me, but for the waste of it all. I am not selfish. Darius, I said, my voice low but carrying in the silent room quiet enough that he had to lean in to hear me. I am not the one who tried to bury his mother in a jar of cat litter. You have millions, he spat, spittle flying from his lips. Millions, Otis, and you let me struggle, you let me drown in debt. You watched me sink and you did nothing. You are a monster. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a lawsuit this time, it wasn't a foreclosure notice, it was a copy of a document I had drafted 10 years ago, the day Dad died, the day I started King Enterprises. I unfolded it and held it up so he could read it, so he could see the date, so he could see his name. This is a trust fund, Darius. I said, my voice steady. This is the Darius King Revocable Trust. I set it up 10 years ago when the business started taking off, when the investments started paying out. I put 10% of every deal into this account just for you." Darius stared at the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers, his mouth dropping open. He saw the balance at the bottom, a number with 6 zeros, a number that would have solved every problem he ever had, a number that would have set him up for life. $2 million, I said, reading the number out loud so everyone could hear. $2 million. Darius sitting in an account, bearing interest, waiting for you. Waiting for what? He whispered, his face draining of blood. "Why didn't you give it to me? I was waiting for you to grow up," I said honestly. "I was waiting for you to stop gambling. I was waiting for you to stop looking for shortcuts. I was waiting for the day you came to me and said, 'Otis, I am ready to work. I am ready to be a man. I am ready to build something instead of tearing it down.'" I folded the paper slowly, deliberating over every crease. If you had come to me, Darius, if you had come to me and said, "I am in trouble, help me," I would have given it to you. I would have paid off Vinny. I would have cleared your debts. I would have given you a fresh start. All you had to do was ask. All you had to do was be honest. Darius looked at the paper in my hand, looked at the $2 million disappearing back into my pocket. He looked at the floor as the weight of his stupidity crashed down on him. He realized then that he had been standing next to a gold mine holding a shovel, but instead of digging for gold, he had used the shovel to dig a grave for his mother. "But you didn't ask," I continued, my voice hard. "Now you stole, you lied, you forged, you tried to kill the woman who gave you life. You chose the quick payout, Darius. You chose the $500,000 insurance check over the $2 million trust fund. You chose the lie over the truth." I put the paper back in my pocket, patting it gently. "You burned the winning lottery ticket." "Darius," I said, "you held it in your hand, and you used it to light a cigarette, and now you have nothing." Darius made a sound, a low animal whine deep in his throat. He reached out his hand, handcuffed, fingers grasping at the air, trying to grab the ghost of the fortune he had lost, trying to grab the brother he had betrayed. "Otis, please," he sobbed, dropping to his knees, clutching the rail. "Please don't let me go to prison. I will change. I swear I will change. Give me the money. Otis, I can pay them back. I can fix this." "It is too late to fix it," I said, looking down at him, looking at the top of his head where his hair was thinning just like Dad's. "It is 10 years too late. You made your choice, Darius, and now you have to live with it." I turned my back on him, walking away from the rail, walking back to Mom. She was watching me. Her eyes dry, her expression resolute. She knew about the trust. She knew about the hope I had held on to for him, and she knew it was gone. The bailiffs grabbed Darius, hauling him up from the floor. He was screaming now, screaming my name, screaming about the money, screaming about the unfairness of it all, but nobody was listening. The judge had already left the bench. The jury was filing out. The show was over. "Take me home, Otis," Mom said, her voice cutting through his screams. "Take me to the garden. I want to see my hydrangeas." We walked out of the courtroom, leaving Darius behind, leaving his screams to bounce off the walls of justice, leaving him to the 10 years of silence he had earned. I held Mom's hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, feeling the pulse of her life. She was alive, she was safe, and the family, the real family, was whole. The $2 million would go to the foundation. Now it would go to build Hattie's heaven. It would go to help people who deserved it. People who had worked all their lives and just needed a safe place to rest. Darius had lost his inheritance, but he had given a gift to hundreds of others without even knowing it. I opened the door to the outside world. The sun was shining. The air was fresh. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of freedom and closure. It was done. The drive away from the courthouse felt different than any drive I had taken in 40 years. The air in the cab of my old Ford truck wasn't heavy with diesel fumes and impending doom anymore. It was light. It was crisp. It smelled like the aftermath of a thunderstorm when the ozone has burned away the rot. My mother Hattie sat in the passenger seat, her eyes closed, her head resting against the cool glass of the window. She wasn't sleeping. She was just existing in a world where her son wasn't trying to bury her anymore. She was breathing in freedom. We drove north, leaving the city limits of Atlanta behind, leaving the concrete and the noise and the memories of Darius screaming in that courtroom. The highway stretched out before us, a ribbon of gray asphalt cutting through the Georgia pines. I didn't turn toward home, toward the house on Elm Street. Not yet. I had one last stop to make, one last card to play, one final secret to dig up from the garden of my life. Otis, she said without opening her eyes, her voice soft but steady. Where are we going? This isn't the way to the house. I glanced at her, seeing the peace on her face, seeing the strength that had returned to her frame. Just a detour. Mama, I said, keeping my eyes on the road, just something I want to show you, something I think you need to see. She didn't argue. She just nodded, trusting me, trusting the son who had brought her back from the dead. We drove for another 20 minutes until the suburbs gave way to rolling hills and horse pastures, until the air tasted like green grass and money. I turned off the main road onto a private drive paved with smooth black asphalt lined with ancient oak trees that formed a canopy overhead, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the hood of the truck. We approached a set of massive wrought iron gates 12 feet high, black and imposing, decorated with intricate scrollwork that looked like vines and flowers. A security guard stepped out of a stone gatehouse. He was wearing a uniform that was crisp and sharp. He saw my beat-up truck. He saw the dents in the fender, and he started to raise his hand to stop us, to turn away the old man and his mother. But then he saw the license plate, and he saw my face through the windshield. He froze. His hand dropped, and he snapped to attention, a rigid military salute that spoke of respect and recognition. He hit a button inside the booth, and the massive gates swung inward, silently, smoothly, welcoming us into the sanctuary beyond. Mom opened her eyes, then sitting up straighter, looking at the manicured lawns that stretched out on either side of the drive, looking at the fountains that shot water high into the air, catching rainbows in the mist, looking at the buildings that rose in the distance. Otis, she whispered, a tremor of fear entering her voice. Is this another home? Is this like Silver Oaks? I reached over and squeezed her hand, feeling the paper-thin skin, feeling the bones that had carried me when I was helpless. No, Mama, I said, my voice fierce, protecting her from even the shadow of that thought. This is not a home. This is not a warehouse. This is a kingdom. I pulled the truck up to the main building, a sprawling structure made of white stone and glass with columns that echoed the old plantation houses but without the ghosts of the past. This was modern, this was clean, this was power getting out of the truck. I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door, offering her my arm. She took it, stepping down onto the pavement, her cane clicking a steady rhythm. A man in a suit walked out of the glass doors. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't an orderly. He looked like a CEO. He was holding a hard hat in one hand and a set of blueprints in the other. He saw me, and he didn't look at my truck. He didn't look at my shoes. He walked straight up to me and extended his hand. Mr. King, he said, his voice respectful, deferential. Right on time. We are just putting the finishing touches on the west wing. The landscaping is complete and the interiors are 90% done. Mom looked from the man to me, confusion clouding her eyes. Mr. King, she repeated, looking at my grease-stained fingernails, looking at the sun. She thought fixed carburetors for a living. I nodded to the man. Give us a minute, Davis, I said. Davis nodded, backing away, giving us space, disappearing back into the building, leaving us alone in front of the masterpiece. I turned Mom toward the entrance, toward the massive stone archway that framed the double doors. Etched into the stone above the arch in letters 2 feet high filled with gold leaf were 2 words, Hattie's Heaven. Mom stopped, her breath hitching in her throat. She stared at the words, reading them over and over again, trying to make sense of the letters, trying to make sense of her name carved into stone on a building that looked like a palace. Otis, she whispered, leaning heavily on her cane. What is this? What is Hattie's Heaven? I took a deep breath, letting the truth finally come out, letting the secret I had carried for 20 years finally see the sun. This is a resort. Mama, I said, gesturing to the grounds, to the walking paths lined with hydrangeas, to the gazebo overlooking the private lake, to the buildings that housed individual suites with marble bathrooms and private balconies. This is a place for people like you, people who worked their hands to the bone, people who raised families and built communities and got nothing in return but tired backs and empty pockets. This isn't a nursing home where you go to die. This is a sanctuary where you go to live. She looked at the grounds, seeing the benches placed in the shade, seeing the garden beds raised high so you didn't have to stoop to smell the roses, seeing the dignity woven into every brick and every blade of grass. But Otis, she asked, turning to me, her eyes wide, searching my face, who built this? Whose money is this? It is mine. Mama, I said quietly. It is yours. She shook her head, unable to process the magnitude of the lie I had lived, unable to reconcile the mechanic with the tycoon. But you are a mechanic, she said. You fix cars, you have the shop. I fixed cars because I liked it, Mama, I said, taking her hands in mine, looking into her eyes, ensuring she saw the truth. I liked the grease, I liked the work. It kept me grounded, it kept me sane. But I haven't needed to fix a car for money since 1995 when I was president of the union. Mama, I didn't just organize strikes, I organized money. I invested the pension funds. I bought land. When nobody wanted it, I bought buildings in downtown Atlanta. When they were boarded up, I started companies, Mama, shell companies, holding companies, investment firms. I swept my arm out, encompassing the estate, encompassing the city, beyond the horizon, encompassing the empire I had built in the shadows. King Enterprises isn't just a name on a deed, Mama. I am the chairman of the board of the largest minority-owned real estate development firm in the state. I own apartment complexes. I own shopping centers. I own the debt on half the buildings on Peachtree Street. I am not a retired mechanic. Mama, I am the silence behind the noise. I am the money that doesn't speak. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, looking at her son, really looking at me for the first time in decades, seeing the way I stood, seeing the way the suit fit, seeing the confidence that I usually hid under a pair of coveralls. You hid it, she whispered. Why, Otis? Why did you let us think? Why did you let Darius think you were poor? Because money makes people stupid, Mama, I said bluntly. Look at what the promise of $500,000 did to Darius. Look at what it did to Amber. If they knew I had millions, if they knew I could buy and sell them 10 times over, they wouldn't have loved me. They would have eaten me alive. They would have been at my door every day, begging, demanding, stealing. I wanted a family. Mama, not a payroll. I wanted you to love me because I was your son, not because I was your bank. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pride, tears of awe. She reached up and touched my face, her hand trembling against my cheek. You built this, she said, looking back at the building, at her name in gold. You built this for me. I built it for you, I confirmed, and for everyone like you. It opens next month. Mama, fully staffed nurses, chefs, drivers, everything top of the line, and the first resident, the queen of the castle, is you. You can live here, Mama. You can live in the penthouse suite. You can have room service every day. You can hold court in the garden, and nobody will ever tell you what to do again. She looked at the building. Then she looked at me. She straightened her back, pulling herself up to her full height, clutching her cane. She looked at the name, Hattie's Heaven, and a smile broke across her face. A smile that was 20 years younger, a smile that was pure joy. It is beautiful, Otis, she said. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Then she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, the sharp wit returning, the matriarch reasserting control. But I am not living here, she said firmly. I blinked, surprised. What, why, Mama? It is yours, it is perfect. Because, she said, tapping my chest with a gloved finger, my home is on Elm Street. My home is where your father asked me to marry him. My home is where I raised my boys, even the bad one. My home is where my memories are. I am not going to leave my house, Otis, not for a palace, not for heaven itself, not yet anyway. I smiled. Understanding hitting me. She was right. Of course she was right. She was Hattie King, and she didn't need a resort. She needed her porch. She needed her kitchen. She needed her life. Okay, Mama, I said, kissing her forehead. Okay, we keep the house on Elm Street. But this stays too. This is your legacy. This is what you gave to the world. She looked at the building one last time, nodding in satisfaction. She turned back to the truck, ready to go, ready to return to her true kingdom. You are a good boy, Otis, she said as I opened the door for her. You are a good man. You lied to me for 20 years, but you did it to save me. You did it to keep me safe. I did it to keep your dignity, Mama, I said, helping her in. I did it so you would never have to bow your head to anyone. She sat in the seat, adjusting her hat, smoothing her dress. She looked out the window at the security guard who saluted as we drove past. She looked at the gates closing behind us, sealing the secret back up. You kept my dignity, she repeated softly, looking at her hands, looking at the absence of the pearls she had reclaimed, looking at the strength that ran through her veins. Thank you, son. Thank you for keeping my name clean. We drove back toward the city, back toward the little house on the double lot. back toward the life that looked simple from the outside but was made of gold. On the inside, I was Otis King, the quiet boss, the silent tycoon, but to the woman sitting next to me, I was just her son, and that was the only title that mattered. The federal penitentiary is a place where time goes to die. It is a gray world of concrete and steel, where the air tastes like recycled despair, and the only colors are the orange of the jumpsuits and the dull gunmetal of the bars. I walk through, the visitor intake processing with the same calm. I used to walk through union negotiations, getting patted down by guards who looked tired of their jobs, emptying my pockets into a plastic tray. I wasn't there as a powerful developer or a wealthy landowner. I was just a brother coming to say the final words over a relationship that had died long before the judge banged her gavel. I sat on the metal stool in the visitation area, picking up the heavy black phone behind the thick plexiglass. Darius walked in. A few minutes later, he looked different than he had in court. The arrogance was completely gone, scrubbed away by 3 months of prison food, and the reality of his sentence, his hair was shaved close to his skull, revealing the shape of the head I used to put in a headlock when we were kids. He looked older, he looked smaller. He looked like a man who had finally run out of road. He sat down and picked up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He didn't look me in the eye. At first, he looked at the counter. He looked at the guard standing by the door. He looked anywhere but at the man who had put him there. "Hello, Darius." I said, my voice neutral, devoid of anger, devoid of pity, just a fact stating its presence. "Otis," he croaked, his voice rough, unused, "you came." "I came." I confirmed, not to gloat, not to bargain, just to finish it. He looked up then, and I saw the desperation in his eyes, the desperate hope of a man drowning who sees a piece of driftwood. "Getting me a lawyer. Are you getting me out? Appeal, Otis? We can appeal?" The sentence was too harsh. 10 years for a first offense. It is not right. You know people, Otis, you have connections, you can pull strings. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a game where the rules could be bent if you knew the right people. He didn't understand that he had broken the one rule that matters, the rule of blood, the rule of loyalty. "I am not getting you a lawyer, Darius," I said quietly, "and I am not pulling any strings. You earned these 10 years. You worked hard for them. You planned for them. You sacrificed your mother for them. I am not going to take away your hard-earned reward." His face fell, the hope extinguishing like a candle in a wind tunnel. "Then why are you here?" he asked, bitterness creeping back into his tone. "To laugh at me, to show me your expensive watch while I wear these cuffs." I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out the 2 items I had been allowed to bring in. I slid them through the slot in the glass tray. One was a book, a thick leather-bound volume with gold lettering on the spine. The Holy Bible. It wasn't new. It was the one Mom had given him for his confirmation 50 years ago, the one he had left in a box in the attic and never touched. The other was a photograph, a 4x6 glossy print, slightly faded at the edges. It was the picture of the 4 of us. Me, Darius. Mom and Dad, standing in front of the family house the day Dad finished building the porch. Dad was smiling, his hand on Mom's shoulder. Mom was holding Darius. He was maybe 5 years old, looking at the camera with a wide, innocent grin. I was standing next to Dad, trying to look tough, trying to look like the protector I would eventually become. "What is this?" Darius asked, looking at the items as if they were foreign objects. "That is your inheritance, Darius." I said, "That is what you have left. You wanted the money, you wanted the house, you wanted the quick fix, but you threw away the foundation. This book might help you find your soul in there, if you still have one. And that picture, that is to remind you of what you sold. That is to remind you of the people who loved you, the people you tried to erase for a gambling debt." Darius touched the photo, his finger tracing the face of his 5-year-old self. Tears welled up in his eyes, but they weren't the crocodile tears of the funeral. They were real. They were the tears of a man realizing he is alone in a crowded room. "I messed up, Otis," he whispered. "I messed up bad." "You did." I agreed, "and you can't fix it. Not with me and not with Mom. She doesn't want to see you, Darius. She doesn't want to hear your name. She is done. She has closed the door and locked it tight." He nodded slowly, accepting the verdict, accepting the exile. Tell her. "I am sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "You can tell her yourself," I said, standing up. "In 10 years if she is still here, and if you have earned the right. But until then you sit here and you think about that trust fund, you think about the $2 million you burned, and you think about the cat litter, Darius, you think about the gravel you tried to turn into your mother." I hung up the phone, cutting the connection, cutting the tie. I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't need to see him cry. I didn't need to see him break. I had seen enough. I walked out of the prison, out of the gray world, and back into the light. Amber. I heard through the grapevine had taken a plea deal in a different state on an old warrant. She was gone, swallowed up by the system, just another grifter who flew too close to the sun and got burned. I didn't think about her anymore. She was just a bad memory, a stain that had been washed out. I drove back to Elm Street. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the neighborhood. The house looked beautiful. The fresh coat of paint I had hired a crew to apply was gleaming. The garden was in full bloom, exploding with color. Mom was sitting on the porch in her favorite rocking chair, a glass of iced tea in her hand, a shawl draped over her legs. She was listening to music, an old jazz record spinning on the player I had set up for her, Miles Davis playing Blue and Green, the trumpet notes floating on the evening air, melancholic and sweet. I parked the truck and walked up the steps, the wood solid beneath my feet. No more creaks, no more rot, just strength sitting down in the chair next to her. I poured myself a glass of tea, the ice clinking softly against the glass. We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat there watching the world turn, watching the fireflies come out dancing in the twilight. "Did you see him?" she asked finally, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I saw him, Mama. Is he okay?" "He is where he needs to be," I said, taking a sip of the tart sweet tea. "He has a Bible and he has a picture. He has time, Mama. Lots of time." She nodded, taking a sip of her own tea. She looked at peace. She looked like a woman who had weathered the storm and come out the other side. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were clear, her spirit unburdened. "We are okay, Otis," she said, reaching out and taking my hand. "We are okay, aren't we?" "We are better than okay, Mama," I said, squeezing her hand. "We are king." I looked out at the street, at the neighborhood that was changing around us. Developers were still circling, prices were still rising, but this house, this plot of land, it wasn't going anywhere. It was anchored by love, anchored by truth, anchored by a son who knew the value of what he held. Somewhere miles away in a concrete box, Darius was sitting on a cot holding a faded photograph, realizing that the emptiness inside him wasn't from hunger or poverty, it was from the loss of the only thing that really mattered. He had chased the gold and lost the treasure. But here on this porch, with the jazz playing and the tea cold in the glass, there was no loss. There was only peace. The deep, satisfying peace of a duty fulfilled, of a promise kept. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, listening to the music, listening to my mother's breathing, listening to the sound of a quiet victory. I smiled. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by loyalty and respect. I spent a lifetime building a fortress to protect my loved ones, only to realize the enemy was sleeping in the guest room. Greed is a blindness that makes you trade a diamond for a piece of glass. My brother chased a quick payout and lost a fortune. But worse, he lost the only mother who ever loved him unconditionally. In the end, I did not need revenge. I just needed to let him be exactly who he was. The trash eventually takes itself out. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I spent 40 years building a kingdom to keep the wolves out, never suspecting the most dangerous predator was sleeping in the guest room. Greed is a terrible disease. It convinces you that a diamond is glass and that a mother's love is a currency to be spent. My brother chased a payout and lost a fortune, but his true loss was the woman who would have died for him. In the end, the best revenge wasn't prison or poverty. It was simply letting him live with the consequences of his own character. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of redemption, and let me know in the comments if you would have forgiven Darius or if you would have let the door stay locked.